And we are live. 3, 2, 1, go. And what's your tag sign? What's our call sign now? Our tagline. Our tagline.
No, I
this is
just thought it sounded cool.
Portal Mountain Development meeting number 60. What even number is it? 66.
All right. I'll give you the sound bite.
And we are.
I'm Jenny.
Okay, I'm Brian. And we are.
We are members of the human race.
Yes.
Seeking to master our humanity.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, that is correct. And what does that mean?
Well, same shit that we've been saying it to me this entire time.
Ah, yes. You must review this entire podcast.
All of it.
Unfortunately.
And then participate in every conversation we've ever had. Reread all of the backlog
and that's why we're alone. Instead of having a crowd stand behind us, it's just us and Penelope, our number one fan. We try not to tease her too much.
Yeah.
So anyways, I'll continue setting up the stream here. Going to share to the Portal Mountain lobby as usual. There's been a bit of discussion today and the last week or so regarding, even last night, we're getting to karma, I guess, was kind of the issue of kind of what it is, and
the good, the
we're
bad,
talking
and the
about getting strawmanned by a certain apprehension of the term, mystical term.
Yeah.
So I guess we're going to talk about, and that is part of karma, because you could say, well, what isn't? What is the functional layer of karma upon which the mystical karma apprehension stands?
Okay, well, let's put it into simple terms first, and to say, and just start off with a notion that the mystical expression of karma is made into palatable narrative, so that it's something that is taken on by the practitioner seriously. And the problem with that is that could have many different kinds of representations and different expositions.
So you're talking about even the fact of karma as a thing, being that we as a species have tried to explain, means that it takes on its own life in representation, in that we try to talk about what it is or isn't, and that's a whole other.
Yeah, so to one person it becomes one kind of a thing that they can understand, and to another it's another kind of a thing. For the sake of some brevity right now, it's a layer of causality, right, in our parlance, and the more common understanding of karma is more like a way to, especially when we come to the Buddhist scene. Let's ignore for a moment that there exists a number of different schools that talk about karma in very different ways, and we're picking on a very specific one, Buddhism being the closest representation. So the whole point being is that once the Buddhist sort of mythology kicked off into a very elaborate format, the palatable formulations of karma became folklore, right? So simpler sound bites that participants can engage with. The problem with that is that ontologically speaking, aka if the model is our ontology, they're not necessarily like what you would call 100% accurate. They're more like pointers.
They never were accurate.
Right.
That it was always wrong to.
It was more like
a
pointer to like engage with your own experience, and it is that experience that is actually more valuable than the exposition. Right. So that's the problem with the mythological karma. If it's taken without the notion that this is something to experience.
This gets back to what we could summarize as feedback. I think the word feedback in model terms has come to be so significant that it would, feedback, observation, tracking method, or whatever, however you would want to expand it, or whatever you want to talk about. The idea of feedback is that, especially, it's obvious in any kind of education scenario, but especially like a religious scenario, you're being given a model the model isn't the truth. It's not like whatever just snaps up in your head, whatever fancy things came up.
You might want to qualify that, because some church members might actually disagree with you right off the bat.
But keep in mind that everybody has their own fancy little thing that just came up in their head when they all heard that very same, say, sermon or passage or whatever, right? So that in itself isn't where you stop. You take this message and you continue to digest it over time. You don't just snap into one reified interpretation,
right,
which is what happens with in terms like this with karma.
And more on that, each reinterpretation as feedback arises does not have to actually include the same components. So, for example, one interpretation could be incredibly realistic. Another interpretation could be very metaphorical or allegorical, right? Like you have,
right,
and then you have a gradient and everything in between. And each one could potentially be valuable to some extent. Like part of the metaphor pertains to the realism. Part of the realism pertains to the metaphor, right? Like you don't have a clean way to digest the information. It's the experience of lived life that actually informs that.
It kind of feels like there's a bit of a spectrum of reification.
Yeah, that's kind of what it's pointing to.
And in many cases, people will reify totally while being unaware of it, because you don't know what's happening. You just get sucked into narratives and myth, and myth in the sense of what you believe is real, not just the fancy stories.
Right. That gets into the discussion of being tethered to the ontological matrix.
Yeah. And so I feel like to be on this spectrum of reification, you would have had to have that outside experience of observing the APS and its functionality, and reifying through the spectacle, like objects in front of you as things.
Could we, and this is a real question for me, I'm not just suggesting, could we potentially observe the what you were calling external as something that simply doesn't not match the internal? So basically an experience that defies reification as it's currently known to the person. So like it doesn't match their ontology. So something in the moment being experienced, right, that doesn't match up with the flow of the dream. So the moment doesn't match the sequence, if you will. Like a frame is out of place, which, given our model, is an entirely possible situation, especially if you're considering peaks of subjectivity and all of that kind of stuff.
Right. For that moment, you may find yourself teleported away to another peak, and then immediately come back and like, did that just happen?
Yeah. So could we not say that instead of like the experience being sort of like outworldly or actually like outside of the regular flow, it's not that. It's just that in the flow of the moments, one of the frames did not coincide with the flow of the narrative. That's what shakes.
And you're saying
that's what shakes the representation up in the mental landscape.
Something that, an anomaly that somebody may feel existential to themselves, that needs to be investigated.
Yeah,
they felt
and
something.
it would rightfully feel like it's otherworldly, because the narrative is such, and this is like from another planet.
You're talking about. I feel like you're talking about the kind of big jump to membership in the guild.
It's one of those things, yes.
Which, in other words, you could say the journey of increasing coherence.
It could even be as simple as from guest to participation, because something is clicking there. You don't know what it is. That's actually mostly the definition.
Right. Yeah.
It's stepping outside that narrative.
Yeah. Even
what is clicking?
So what you're saying is the click to happen before that is, so like these people are doing something, or I just saw that person do something interesting that I don't understand.
It doesn't fit.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not like you didn't just teleport to another peak in a sense, but
it just doesn't make sense in this peak. And that experience with the other peak, and then coming back of being like, wait a minute, is this my solid ground, or did I just go somewhere? What the fuck just happened?
Mm-hmm.
Why did that moment not fit with the rest? And of course, this is talking very abstractly. We're not like, it could be a very subtle experience, or it could be a very life-changing experience.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is being made is the same. And in fact, you could argue that the more life-changing experience types are an expression of the more subtle ones, an accumulation thereof, an aggregation thereof, or something to that
Yeah,
effect.
that's what I was saying. Like, what it feels like it could be an echo, like from moving from guest to participant.
Kind of speaks to that idea of the side channel too, doesn't it? It feels like in this schema, it feels like a side channel, while not being a real side channel.
Hmm.
It feels like in this schema.
It's getting the monitor up.
Get some good old feedback.
Feedback. Don't get me started on feedback.
So yeah.
Just good to see yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So we know where we're at.
So let's take it further.
Further.
Axiology, good, bad, narrative, revelations, if you will, what we basically are alluding to. Side channel. And interestingly, you can actually sense almost intuitively why the system is framed to eliminate the anomalies for its own smoother operation. So to the mechanical aspect of the system, these anomalies are distractions, right? They're taken away from productivity. They're taken away from the reality of the very system within which these occur.
Well, true also in more natural settings of just your environment. Some things can be weird, but you can't always investigate every last thing for being weird, right? Like the whole world is weird.
At which point does weird become normal?
Right, but yet this is a reflection of that same phenomenon, I think. Except when it happens sort of inwardly, in that you're not observing your environment per se, but you're observing somehow the thing that observes an environment, in realizing that kind of self-referenceness. That I think can be very much more kind of feeling meaningful. You know, like you can't really ignore when things happen in the back room, if you will. It's hard to ignore when like fundamental shifts happen or like weird.
No, it's easy to ignore. What's hardest to shift one's latching, so to speak, mechanism. So the interesting thing about Buddhism as well, that applies here, is that one of the things that is part of the Buddhist method is to latch on to what's called a noble view.
It's not actually easy to ignore insight into the next phase of, if you will, of
well, you'd have to
coherence.
You'd have to have insight in order to jump.
Like when you
latch.
When you get that type of insight, that's what I mean is that I guess I'm talking about not just casual things that people go through in their daily life, but an insight. When those hit you, something happened in the back, okay. Like how...
Can I qualify that? The Buddhist metaphor is perfect for this. Just saying it tackled this.
But that's what I thought we were talking about, is like the things that you can't ignore. You were saying, you can just ignore it, but I'm talking about a fundamental change that Buddhism, is learned. It's a learning change that happens.
So in Buddhism, one of the premises is that the suffering, the first noble truth, is actually a function of the second noble truth, which is desire. So a problem comes up. What if your desire is to relinquish desire? So what the answer to that usually is like, okay, so you have desire to walk the path when that happens, and that's called the noble desire. But the consequence of this particular desire, so it's like you're using the system against itself. The consequence of this particular desire is to, once you've walked to the end of the path, you will know you're at the end of the path. So that's your insight. And that insight makes it so that the desire for walking the path is no longer relevant because the realization of being at the end of it has occurred. So
Right.
once you've walked the path, the desire to walk the path disappears, and that path had been all about letting go of desire to begin with. So that being the very last desire to dissipate, because how do you know you've completed the path? All other desires have disappeared, including the one to make desires disappear. And that's how the knowledge of the end of the path is obtained to begin with, insight. And so in retrospect, if you take it all back, is that the path is, so to speak, like taking advantage of the setup by the system to allow model to propagate itself. I don't know if that made complete sense, but that's like the overall picture that the Buddhist scripture presents to for us to potentially rely on and use to formulate the rest of this. So that's the idea. So in this schema, for example, if you make your narrative,
at least you brought up one very relevant piece there, which I think is at the end of this path of wanting to dissolve desire, absolve, whatever the word you say, there is a definitive stopping point that can be known and felt internally.
The desire has been let go of. And reverberating back, the desire to let go of desire is incorporated into the set of desires being let go of.
Well, because
it is the same thing.
As we go through our experience and experience desires coming at us again, that second level desire of the desire to not have desire is always coming along with that desire. So you've attached this kind of supervisor desire on top of every other desire. So when those stop arising, so does this one.
And so if you look at it from good, bad, and functional perspective, it's like the transformation of good and bad desires to become more functional in their representation. And so the narrative doesn't go and introduce more good or more bad stuff. It just goes on to reintroducing more functional stuff. Even though good and bad stuff came into the moment, only functional stuff comes back out.
Right.
And that's the untethering that
what
we're
you mean by
about.
functional here, you're saying basically like a medium exists, it's usurped by certain other narratives.
Let's use the energy metaphor. A lot of actual energy had been focal pointed to a specific potential. That potential does not disappear with the untethering, right? The untethering happens within the realm of the potentiality. But energy is still coming in, and energy is still being dissipated. So the transformation in the stack that we would see is that the narratives of good and bad in context all become these merged things of functionality only. It was good and bad in the narratives over here, but the narrative has changed, and so it's neither good nor bad. It's just consequence.
But again, what I'm seeing here is like we can use our language stacking models to note that there is a medium of functional karma in which things happen in kind of the polymorphic machine, if you will.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you have something which is more akin to like the breakaway system or the market via ego. Like, does that not completely directly relate to this tether point?
No,
Think about it. How is the ego
It's
latched
actually
in?
the inversion of this that relates to the tether point. because
but you see a strong connection between these, right?
Yes,
Karma, untethering, and the ego.
So what should happen is that model speak should precede system speak, layer-wise, in the untethered fashion.
What?
But in the tethered scenario, we have, if we're layering model speak and system speak as languages, in the ideal situation, untethered, you have model speak being utilized by the system for function. So it's the base language out of which everything else is getting built. That's what we're trying to achieve with inventing the language. The problem is that we have to come at it backwards. We've given system speak. We're translating that into model speak and then taking that entire layer and trying to shove it underneath it. So we're building it on top of it and shoving it underneath. So there's the building part, which everybody seems to be okay with because everybody's system speaking. But taking that layer and putting it back beforehand, that's the reification issue.
But and you're talking about like a guild
order, chaos,
a
order,
guild
switching.
membrane. Let's say like what happens within the membrane. You're talking about the kind of gift economy. That's the shoving under, which people don't understand. Is that kind of what you're pointing at?
Pull up the order chaos picture.
Whoa, which one?
The twig. Burb.
No burb. I think it's at the top.
There you go. So, if we're starting at the top, right? So if we system speak, order is found where everything is dissected. That's our starting point. So we have to create model speak from that ordered thing. We have to go to the chaos side.
Yeah.
And then say that's order. So there's like so many different mental gymnastics involved to get there, right?
Well, this
is the same problem we're seeing with model speaking as shoving it underneath English, for example, to say, okay, when you speak English, it means that.
Like it is a problem, but it's not. It's what always happens at every layer is always doing this.
I'm not saying it's a problem. I'm saying our starting point is very much removed.
Our problem is that the starting point is the breakaway system, if you want to call it that, only sees the dissected part as the order.
Correct.
Does not see the life as order.
Correct. So we have to use that. We have to create a language out of those pieces on top of it, right? Representative of the holistic stuff underneath it. And then we're asking people to go up, then jump down twice. So we've been successful at, say, going up, given the information, like distilling the model pieces, if you will. But to crunch it all back down, bring it before your language spoken, and to see every scenario in those terms, that's the step we have not been successful at.
You could say, and we have been, but as in, this is a process. When you take a model and utilize it, through feedback, that's a personal process.
Yes, experiential.
We don't know,
I can't do that for you.
We don't know what the effects are going on out there. We have no idea.
So you see, the actual fundamental issue why it is a tall order isn't in the expression, even in the capturing of the representation of the model. It's actually taking that model from being above system speak and make model speak precede system speak. I'm using them to contrast each other, but you know what I'm trying to say. System speak being regular English, if you will.
So system speak is linear.
Mechanical, yeah.
Mechanical.
Algorithm.
I'm just imagining these pine needles, breaking them apart. It's like to the system, whatever came up to it, that's that impression. It's like a shotgun blast. Boom, that's your impression. You've got this many needles, this many branches. A branch is made up of many branches, and it branches off. It connects to a tree.
Yeah, you're trying to take that order picture and reconstruct the chaos picture out of it. That's a tall order to begin with, and then you're asked to make that chaos picture your order picture and think of your initial picture as the chaos, which is like where you started from. So how can your own reality be chaos, right?
Yeah.
Like
so again, we're kind of
to unpack there.
Difficultingly is that a word?
Unpack?
Difficultingly.
Yeah, that's not
describing the loop. It is, in this case, it's a word.
Well, yeah, because this is the same picture.
This is the strange loop. This is the consequence of stacking languages on top of each other, where each one utilizes what's below, therefore needs to understand what below works.
Or risk complete destruction. Entropy. Again, entropy is a huge player.
Right. So that's all that we're saying that in this, that I'm trying to get at, is that this is the loop. The loop must be not only just top down, as order likes to do, but sensing the feedback of what you're when you appropriate.
What
the
are
world.
you on? What are you actually are on top of? Which peak are you on?
Every time that we try to make a change in the world, we are utilizing a model. And if we don't pay attention to the before and after of our model usage, then we have no idea how good our model is, like whether it's doing what we expect it to. When it does, that's great. When it doesn't, this is the whole, we have to pull from chaos to improve that model.
The image...
We sense the feedback back into it.
So the picture you've painted for me was this. You have this natural world flowing along, and then model. I have a change to implement in this model. And then you're asking all of the complexity and the intricacies of nature to actually accommodate that. Meanwhile, you're like, what? A 30, 40, 50-year-old human on the planet? Contending with billions of fucking years of evolution?
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. It's, that's what that picture sets up for me.
What you said sets up for me in my mind this idea of resonance waves, in that that image of the flowing, we think we're going and just stamping down an order, but really through our body is just shaking and resonating through our power capacities in various media and causing whoosh. That's what's actually happening.
What we're trying to do is we're trying to stick a pillar made out of snow into the ground of a moving avalanche.
Pillars aren't made of snow. It's an icicle.
Hence... No. We're missing the part of making it an icicle too. We're making it out of snow.
Mm-hmm.
Dropping that shit into a moving avalanche and then going... Where did the snowflakes of my pillar disappear to?
Or not even caring.
We
have to pay attention to it. Of course, yes, we're part of our environment. We radiate out through action.
Meanwhile, we could have been snowboarding. Just a thought.
Yeah, like it doesn't have to be complicated.
But picture this, like somebody's like driving stake after stake after stake after stake into the snow. And let's call it a very slow avalanche. Okay? Let's just make it non-lethal. Just for the sake of argument, I'm not saying this is a real scenario. I'm just talking about the situation of like spending all of this time going and none of it is lasting. It's just moving off in that direction and whatnot. And then this guy's like snowboarding. Of course it's gonna piss him off because this guy's having fun. You're toiling away at the fucking Cain and Abel right fucking there.
Where were we though? All I wanted to do is point to the fact that this is about the strange loop, the Hofstadter stuff.
I know, I kind of went off the rails there. Sorry.
That's it. And yet that's a very complicated thing to bring up, but that's this is the kind of expression you get when you run into that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think I was trying to make more a point about the decisions that you're making with the situation you're given. In one situation, you're given a flow, and all you're trying to do is stop it, and you're fighting against the current. And then the other one is like, there's a current. What can I use it for? Where can I go using said current to do what I need to do? It's a very different perspective on the same situation.
But and also there, with that view, that perspective, there's this understanding that things change, the environment changes all the time.
Right. So
So
if you're going in
I
one
it's
direction,
flowing, therefore it's this state and then it's this state. That
yeah,
those are two things. Whereas the systemic mind would typically want to see things in a static way
right.
and not care. It's like you don't care what it becomes after you do that to it. You've that's it's just an input output type of calculation.
I got a shitty metaphor again, but if you were to imagine a mirage in the desert, the systemic point of view would be getting pissed off at the fact that you arrived at the location and there's nothing there, whereas the other perspective would basically be to notice the fact that, wait a minute, as you're walking towards the damn thing, it starts to exhibit different qualities that may not seem as realistic, and changing your mind before you even get there to waste your time.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
It's a shitty metaphor, like I said, but it's up there.
The mirage. I'm sure we'll use that somewhere else maybe. And before we do that, we shall take a break. And we're back then. So we had the chaos order charticles.
Yeah, to speak to the difficulty of...
talking about strange loop as well.
Yeah.
And
but also the kicker of like you have system speak, model speak above that, and then model speak having to go precede system speak as a feedback reference after the fact. So you have this difficult
because it's pointing to itself,
right? Which is a system,
obviously.
which is what the system is not poised to do.
There's an interesting like mapping to coherence here as well, because with membership you can speak that model layer above system. With participation you only can speak system as far as like the coherence goes.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Guest to participant.
Mm-hmm. And so that there kind of shows you how the degrees of coherence are aligned. They're aligned totally functionally, whether you have this ability to in your mapping or not.
Now you're catching on. There's no good or bad involved.
And that's good.
It doesn't. but you see how it doesn't.
And that's a good thing.
You see how like this particular narrative of the model makes like that question almost like irrelevant, not completely irrelevant. There is still the idea of pain and pleasure being a qualitative element of experience, right? So we're not talking. But when pain and pleasure are divorced from reward and punishment entirely, completely, right? It isn't about propagating the narrative. It's responding to moments of pain and moments of pleasure as they come or go.
And this is talking about like the tether. In other words, how the market is made functional through the ego, causing people to act and behave
to justify next reward, the next punishment. It's so
right.
So the market perpetuates the idea of why a punishment or a reward is deserved.
I brought up the term participant society before in the past, and that's purely based on this kind of reified idea of justice, right? The participant society is only interested in rewards and punishments.
Yes. Participant society would actually be sensitive to the side channels reinterpretations of moments. It would splice in a different movie into the picture, right? Like if you're thinking about like the narrative as like a motion picture with each moment being a frame, and then the side channel is this are these frames that simply defy the narrative. If you get enough of that, what you're getting, like in the guest sense, you have one movie, and everything is getting reinterpreted by that. In the participant sense, you have two movies, and one somehow is infecting the other, but not clearly.
Isn't that what we see though? We do see that anyways. So
and the membership sees
stands.
that there's two.
I think the point still stands, and it still makes sense. To like, I was when I brought up that term, it's not in wide use or anything.
Which
but,
one?
Just the idea of juxtaposing a participant society with a membership society. In the participant society, it's soundbite driven. It's not like
right.
Internally.
What I'm trying to say is that the participant society is driven by two distinct narratives, where one is
right, like
hidden.
We damn well better be participant society. If it's purely a guest society, imagine that. Like, that's like boring.
Guest society is the standard, with hostility being even more likely. Entropy. Again.
Yeah. Okay. It's a spectrum. We're seeing all different kinds of people.
A spectrum gravitating towards chaos, not order. Entropy only in its very specific formats gives like a negative
Right.
entropy cycle. That's the narrow path. That's a tall order.
So like
that's
this black hole of entropy sucking things in
Mm-hmm.
on one way, which can't, that just exist. You could say, and there's a counter force from above, if you will, negentropic force, kind of pulling into order.
Yeah, if you catch the correct cycles. In between, like, notice
But
how
order is never greater than this potentiality of the chaos surrounding it.
I'd like to make another point. Like we have an example of this from physics, where everything that ever happens is exactly in the middle between two extremes. So you can have absolute cold and an absolute heat kind of a deal, right? But everything that
In theory.
but everything that is interesting to us that happens in the middle zone. So not too cold, not too hot, where chemistry is allowed to play,
Right.
right? So you have that situation of almost also existing in the center of both order and chaos. So
Just right.
so
The Goldilocks
Mm-hmm.
regions.
So, while we're faced with entropy being the default mode into which everything disintegrates into, we find ourselves also in a very special spot in which we can enact negative entropies.
Right.
That's the potential of it. So entropy is still going to be overwhelmingly the force, but in the usage of this entropy, negative entropy can be realized. And I'm not talking about like the mystical element of it, but I'm talking about how even if you increase entropy in a whole system, you can still decrease entropy in a localized spot. That is simply
Right. Well, that's
simply
always
happens.
what's happening. Yeah. What that's using this type.
So
of
we're
model.
using using that metaphorically again, not physically, but metaphorically.
Just like
in
the
the-
sun
in-
is hot, it gives energy.
In the realm of thought gives way to entropic forces, garbage, basically, garbage thinking.
And this does connect us to the cosmos in a way, through like the sun just bashing the planet Earth with energy, and that's in theory the best dissipators of that energy are more complex, right? So there's a increasing complexity that happens as you just blast the shit out of matter.
The more complex, the more efficient. That's the gist of it. Those complex structures, the reason
But
why
efficient at dissipating, which is the
reason
interesting
that
part.
they become stable, they're not actually stable, they're metastable. So long as they're being fed the energy to maintain themselves, they're stable, right? That kind of thing.
Do you know that?
Or if they're overfed that's the middle Goldilocks area. If they're overfed the energy, that also acts on it and breaks it apart. Right? So you have to have
Many
like a
things,
middle.
yeah.
The centricity, being the center of the universe, the self being the center of the universe.
Right,
is
because like
content.
always,
it's
the sun
different ways
could
of
go not at any moment, but supernova, whatever. Hey, that's too much energy. Whoa, buddy, calm down over there.
And each center like that is the self. So I am the earth, I am the human, I am the sun, I am the galaxy, I am the universe, I am. Our thinking pattern is involved
Right, it's pretty
through that.
congruent way of thinking, I suppose.
It's unified. And I'm pretty sure that this is where the Hindu
So this
sort
is
of
like
fit-
the myth of entropy.
or the myth of lack thereof. If you ignore entropy, I am becomes a solid unified entity in an ontological matrix. Unchanging. Our model negates that by saying, nah.
We should make a book called I don't know, 33 Myths of the Model. I don't know.
Just to be a dick.
The title just came to me. I don't know where from.
No idea. Zero. Have you had any further communication?
Yeah, we're kind of on summer summer break time
Cool.
feels, but the idea of the subreddit, Reddit just imploded right after that, so we kind of agree there's no point in trying to get a subreddit going, put all the effort into it for a dying platform. So the understanding right now is,
Imploded how?
SOTs.
It's in a flux, so I don't know how it's
Reddit?
imploding. Reddit has been imploding since...
No, there's, were you on Dig before Reddit?
I've touched it. Like, poked it once or twice.
Yeah. So everybody knew when that thing was dying. Just kind of a collective feeling.
So we have a way of maintaining contact, is what you're saying?
Yeah, no, everything's good. But so where we left off is basically, SOTS is kind of in a hibernation mode right now of protest of, I don't know.
You gave him a lowdown a bit?
We are trying to find the next medium, basically, and find/develop, right? And this kind of gets into the dashboard stuff, and you know yourself what Andrew's his kind of ambitions with this idea of social media as a card, like through cards. Which that's something we've been working on for like a really long time.
All right.
And so hopefully something comes up out of it, because if we find a new home, then I'll be inviting Mr. Allen along with his community, but you have to find something solid. You don't want to just make something that's going to fade away. That's me. Welcomes.
No, I'm looking at the time.
Ah, yes. We're about halfway.
I was wondering, shall we maybe get back on track with axiology and good, bad, and functional karma?
Yes. That's, I think, a connection we've been waiting to make.
And this is partially in response to the conversations we've been recently having.
I think the camera's moving way too much.
Why is it moving?
It's because the fan is blowing directly at it.
All right, well, let's just give you.
Let's try.
Let's just give you a bit of seasickness.
Oh yeah, it's way out in there. You got to move your. Is it that way, or how even? Is it flipped? Yeah, because we can't read that. Okay, no more.
Stop moving.
Seasickness. It's bad.
All right, let's just try to wing it then.
Tis bad.
We'll look at it and then try to talk. It's not going to be as wonderful as our previous allusions. We could pull up the car diagram. You know what we could do? We could pull up the car diagram.
Let's see what happens first. Or we could just do that.
Inception.
Here it comes. Alright, so what I was going to do is simply attempt to take a picture. Send that. And then, so pardons, but I guess that's the way to do it, eh?
Today.
Probably just, it's gonna kill the chat. It's gonna be weird. And today is the way to do it that way. No, not that one. Oh, no.
We're trying.
Oops. Oh, no. Telegram. Such a weird interface. Okay. This is the gist of what you've drawn.
Yeah, it's the car diagram ish. It's missing the agency at the bottom, in between expression, going back and forth. That's a detail that's not really relevant to what we're trying to talk about, though, because the circle above everything, where it talks about narrative, good, bad, and functional, is really the meat and potatoes, if you will, of what we're trying to get to. Specifically, good, bad, in connection to the discussion of karma in the chat, and in connection to the axiology discussion in the previous conversation.
It's interesting how functional karma is a way of saying, like, just pure model view of reality, sort of.
It's only interesting when you're trying to make model super mundane kind of thing, like superficial, or like, you know what, mythological, mystical, and all of that kind of stuff. But it doesn't come as a surprise at all if you're looking at models only trying to, like, give you the an expression of the everyday to begin with, in a kind of an ultimate sense. But this ultimatality, if you will, is not separate from what is happening right there and now.
Right.
And so it's not too surprising that that's the consequence, right? Like what you're just saying.
I'm reminded how if you were to explain something simple, you have
takes
to,
infinity of words. Yeah.
There's an unlimited number. The more simple something is to explain, the longer it takes to actually iterate all of its connections.
Its simplicity, yeah.
Right.
to
Ironics.
To remove the cruft, if you will, off of the purity of it.
The cruft.
It's almost like a cleaning mechanism. So, do we have enough to start connecting the points? Point number one, the narrative bubble above there, in connection with the discussion of good and bad karma from the chat.
So what is the question of good and bad in the straw man sense, I guess? But it is really the straw man, because there is like moral karma built onto functional karma, I guess. That's what you'd say.
If you add it. If you layer another narrative on top of model, from systemic point of view.
Right.
So if you go beyond model, it will have that karmic layering. And sometimes that's not a bad thing. Like, for example, if you're
right, I guess that's what I'm trying to
if you're talking to a
differentiate.
If you're talking to a guest in an effort to have them participate, for example, you may want to utilize good karma kind of a thing, kind of a expressions to represent the message of the model, right? Like effectively utilizing the context of good in their narrative to point to the isomorphism between that good and the model. So you're not like pushing model on them specifically. You're relying on the good effects of their narrative to push to integrate the model into.
Right. This sounds like a feedback thing.
So it's a transformation of good into functional, and it's the same transformation that happens at one's own insight. That point I made before, where the good and the bad hit this wall and become functional after the fact, being quote-unquote enlightenment, which is a very, very similar description in Buddhism for Nibbana.
Right.
That is the letting go. That is the unbinding, untethering. So
it's kind of probably seen as tragic in a lot of cases where people are like, "Oh, you're lost. You will never do anything just for the good." But this doesn't understand the fact that the functional karma takes care of the whole world. Nothing is out of sight.
Right. In really terse, kind of like believe it or not kind of a deal, yeah. Like, you can only take that on faith, right? Like, you can't say that to somebody and be like, just believe
just
that.
Because somebody won't get wrenched into a soundbite machine, that means they're not a good person.
Or it could mean they're a bad person to somebody simply because they're not supportive of their cause. So you see how like that neutrality can't necessarily remain neutral, because taken from another perspective, that neutrality becomes negative.
Right. that kind of points to the fact that everything should be engaged, and ideally with skill, and parts of those skills are like translating meaning and temperament and all this kind of stuff into
a point that has been made, that has been
out.
butchered to death in these discussions, right? Like having the model speak become a way to say of binding different languages, not even dialects, but languages. So when you say a word in model speak, right, in this language it's this exposition, that language is this exposition, but they both amount to the same isomorphic thing. If you do that, you get there. So that's why it's not like a language dependent model speak, if you will. I actually forgot the initial point I was trying to make with that, but it's still relevant.
Just connecting with people where they're at, intersecting their narratives through skilled language navigation.
So, do you think we could tackle the question of that was raised against the strawman karma speculation? Like, you don't see necessarily
a general idea, like how people who are doing super bad things in high places of power
don't get the retribution,
just continually feel rewards, and they can pay off any fines or whatever. Like, it doesn't hit them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, how does that play in?
So,
and like, to believe that karma isn't real, because it's this idea of justice, as if karma is a justice, an equalizer, storing a storehouse of
a cosmic storehouse of good and bad deeds that are to be accounted for.
So we kind of we all have this innate feeling of justice, a sense of it.
Yeah.
I think that we want that to be the case.
So to capture the concept of karma in this picture, we are looking at the top circle that captures narrative, good, bad, functional. It captures wakes, captures dissipation, absorption, captures energy, and it captures fiat. Sorry. That whole circle.
And you added this narrative circle later, because what you were doing was drawing the car diagram, essentially,
with all of its components,
having an emphasis on wakes at the top.
Yeah, to capture the whole notion of a wake, and then to top it off with the whole notion of the narrative, which only takes the top portion of the entire car diagram as its basis, so that it's not concerned with the inner functions of the layers underneath. So at that point in time, in the narrative bubble, there is no concern with the underlying functionality.
So this let's call it a diagram that you've made, is an attempt to be of something to be latched on top of what the car diagram provides as a medium,
to see its more elaborate consequence and its connection to narrative. By extension, its connection to the ontological matrix in one sense, and its connection to the spectrum of stupidity in the other sense, which is where your good, your bad, your functional is actually coming from.
Right. And then the machine that you're
just like combining all of these different diagrams into one's the peak of all, like, if you take all of these functionalities together, this is what you should be looking at. This is like the bubble top on the surface of what's happening. Like, these are the elements that constitutes the end results. So you're in an ontological matrix, and this is all flowing out. Like like, you know in Quake how the water works by welling up from within? This is what you're seeing in this. Shitty analogy, only used because you play Quake.
I even forgot.
And I'm talking about
about.
Remember the original Quake? How the lava flowed and the water flowed? It had like that motion. It's like kind of welling up from within.
Like
and you only see the surface.
The 2D.
Yeah, the
like
2D of the 3D space.
Right.
So that top bubble, encompassed by narrative, is like just capturing that surface. Nothing below it. It's opaque.
Yeah. Yeah, I get the point of the chart. That's what I mentioned before. This kind of is sitting on top of the car chart in a way. Just a different view of something higher up a little bit.
Okay.
Makes sense?
Yep. Yeah, so this is the way to look at it. And what I'm trying to say here is that the notion that is known as karma sits in that bubble. So you have your overarching narrative, and it has its and it sets up what we call its context. That context.
So by notion of karma, you're talking about narrative stories, the stories we tell, what we think karma is in this case or in that case. So it is. It means justice is going to come to that person.
Karma, in this sense, is the realm of causality that is sitting on top of physicality. Physicality it's a many-to-many relationship. You can't encode the ongoings of karma in a specific way in the bottom layer.
I think one way.
It could be this way, that way, the other way, the second way. And all of those same representations could be good karma going up depending on a different context. Going up this way, that way, the other way again. It's a many-to-many relationship, and therefore it's completely disconnected in terms of...
I think where you're pointing is, like, look at the neurochemical operating system layers and where you jump into the neurological from the...
No, neurological is neurochemical.
Neuron to signal.
Other way around. It's when
But this is what I'm just saying. I'm pointing at this point. That's where I think you're pointing to.
No, it's the difference between the two operating systems themselves. It's when you have the social operating system representing the neurochemical system or not. Nuance level notwithstanding. We're not talking about
that's important too, but I think we can talk about both and all of them too. But yeah, let's dive into that more solidly. We have two horizons. We're talking two horizons, right?
So, all right. So, functional versus good and bad, based on just what we just said.
Yeah.
Functional would be when the social operating system, i.e., its language, its terminology, and everything, is capturing the neurochemical operating system and its qualitative facilities.
That sounds very basic.
Model. That's model. Right then and there.
And this is the loop as well. And by social, it's implied the narrative, right?
And it's also implied that you have to take the social operating system, build a model on top of that, and then take the model and put it underneath the social operating system after the fact. It speaks into all of these different elements. And there's so much involved.
These are the different views that you can take, such as I am participating in this greater system. I am doing the protocol for this space that I'm in, or I am creating this protocol and this is the way that, like, I'm gonna create a space and match it in virtual
Right,
to
right, right.
the reality.
System speak versus what model speak looks like. And so you can see in the participant is like they've got the two systems, but they're speaking system. The member, they've got the two systems and they're speaking model. And the master doesn't see a difference between the two systems. The market machine is the polymorphic machine. It's subsumed by it.
Subsumed? Market. Oh yeah. We had lots of discussion about this polymorphism.
Well, market always exists within
market
model.
and polymorphism, the socio-mechanical spectrum.
But its expression exists within market, and we've always had this difficulty. We have to use system to talk model.
Well, I think that's a great insight that I've never seen anywhere else well explained in detail, like that type of strategy, that it's not about fighting anything, but what the system gives us, what our modern society and technology gives us, is a high potential, very lot of potential. Don't kill the system. Don't burn it down and do all this bullshit.
It's not the system that's the problem.
You create something on top of it.
It's the entropy. Not the system, it's the entropy. Right? Uncertainty underlies everything. And that's because entropy makes everything function. So, and the deal with entropy is that there's a lot more fucked up combinations than there are correct ones in order to facilitate quote-unquote order, or any semblance thereof.
Right. You're talking about more prime motivation, I think. Primal motivation.
But to model that, to incorporate that into every moment of thinking, it doesn't drive a specific story anymore. It just drives the reality of what's happening. That's how you undermine narrative through narrative. By making narrative about what's happening rather than whatever you fucking want narrative to be.
So it seems like there's at least two like major roles here. One is like a participant, not participant, but like the from bottom up of the model, like, and the other is like of
the ideal natural conclusion thereof.
Of dealing with the maps, creating maps, what the reality of this situation is, how things work, how maps connect together, the abstract of something. There's that needs to be developed through feedback all the time.
And ironically, that's an archetype. And an archetype means that there's never one specific representation of that. There's only attempts at trying to get closer and closer and closer and closer.
Yeah, okay, so what are our two archetypes? We're talking about myth,
collector and grandmaster. Those are
so
the
then
two.
We're unvilifying the collector then.
Oh no, it's never been a villain in our parlance to begin with. It's
villain-like.
villain-like.
But just think about it.
It's like Mara in...
It's so easy to...
Mara in Buddhism. Mara is the god of desire in Buddhism, but he is not an enemy. He is he is a student and a teacher.
Well, that's what I'm saying. What should be. So the collector is doing good things by collecting certain things, but you have to work together.
A collector without model is collector. A collector through model is grandmaster. Because what's collected is different. What is collected? Protocol. Protocol for what? Isomorphism. Sure, it's collected, learn, mature. That's the narrow path. Everything else that you can collect is garbage. Prune. Same metaphor.
Yeah.
It's hygiene.
So we never.
It's
I don't think we
hygiene,
ever
it's nutrition.
talked about the collector in like such neutral terms.
No, because that just came to me now. But this is hygiene. This is nutrition. This is fitness. This is rest.
So we have to apologize to the collector and say we're sorry. We didn't mean to. We didn't mean to demonize you. All right. So the collector and the grandmaster, they work together. They're cool. More on that after a break.
speak is not bad. Right?
Axiology
So
muddies the water.
Yeah, axiology is the root of obfuscation,
which is like a reified moral.
Reification problem. An introduction of reification problems.
Axiology.
Or dysmorphism, or whatever. So now that we've captured the idea that narrative is like the medium, karma is like its quality of good, bad, and functional. I don't have a different word for karma, but intention is a good one. So let's call it intention now. For what?
I agree.
Until we find something different.
Yep. No, we've been using that already. Or you have.
So we have this absorption and dissipation of
capital
energy.
I intention.
Yeah.
Like this is a thing that's going to come back and somehow come back to
intention in the context of a narrative with intention to progress the narrative in some shape or form.
Kind of like a big idea here is that this intention is built into these layers higher than the functional itself. This is no longer just functional, but by intention we're saying this is like there's some sort of story behind it.
There's a portion of the protocol that drives the behavior. It's embedded into the protocol. There's no rhyme or there's no rational reason behind it. It's
and then this is why when I asked you, okay, like, isn't it important, like, intention is like the entire stack of protocols?
It's a component of the protocol that is being executed. So,
but I mean, the protocol, yes, but think about how many protocols are all like, when we have a plan, so and we make a plan to do something, there's all those objects are,
the way to think about it,
are part.
The way to think about it is that any protocol is an expression of other protocols. So intention is built in by virtue of whatever those protocols were to begin with. So if you're using a protocol to build a protocol, whatever the intention was hidden in the first protocol is going to be laced into the next protocol, and so on and so forth and so forth. And also recall that protocols within stacks are installed. So the only real intention underlying every other intention is the intention to seek intentions, so to speak. If you muddy those waters through protocols, you get obfuscation again. That's the gateway.
No, through reification of protocols, because you're always having protocols.
If you install protocols, and protocols are so by install I mean we're talking fiat, right? So whatever the intention was embedded here is encoded. It may not play out the same way depending on what other protocols are in place in the next stack, right? That's the entropy part. However, the issue with
how deluded people are, etc.
The issue with protocols and the issue with dog whistles specifically is piggybacking on this. So when you repeat the mantra of somebody else, like globalists are Jews, as a code word for Jews, everybody is repeating the word globalist, 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 but everybody underneath is copying the intended protocol that only subtle few can read. The Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews. Well, so you have a superficial layer that doesn't register this at all, and you have the other layer that spoke the language to begin with. That's how fucking convoluted this shit can get.
Giving credit even to the idea that some...
I'm using a simple example to illustrate a problem. I'm not talking about the merits specifically of
talking this week
accuracy.
About conspiracy theories and all that. And I think part of the point is forget about whether this or that did or did not happen or by this or that group. Just study yourself and therefore society. Study society through yourself.
And what are they trying to get you to do? Yeah.
Right.
I think that was your point.
Yeah, and notice
what is you're being asked of?
By taking on these feelings of the propaganda, what motivates you? What action are you taking?
Are you asked to be hateful to your neighbor? Are you asked to be
right? Yeah, what are the effects like on the local level?
What's interesting about that? All of these effects are completely antisocial.
Right.
In the name of
Totally,
in the
like,
name of social coherence.
just shouldn't be
How
what's
does
broadcast.
Wait, what? How to single out your enemies in order to maintain social coherence? Do you not fucking hear yourself?
Yeah.
How to decoherent yourself to become coherent?
And then, but I
What?
think a lot of this kind of insight is weaponized too, like, because, say, even on the left, let's say these kind of arguments, like,
But look at the level of this weaponization, and let me draw you yet one more metaphor, because this is what's happening. You're taking the idea of, say, pruning your tree by fucking sawing it off at the fucking base. So, do you get it? You're supposed to cut off a few branches here and there, just to, like, they're dying. No. You take, throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing, and undercut the whole thing at the stem, and they're going, why isn't it growing that fast? Holy shit! What? There used to be so many branches over here, and now it's.
well, it is wild if you think about
it's dead.
That,
Like, fuck,
like,
man.
at least half the population is, like, seems totally enamored with their political ideology. At least half. So, like,
Okay,
so much of the world out there is ready to just
Can
be
I-
at each
can I
other's
take-
throats because
Can I take issue with
these
this
are
line of
complete.
thinking?
Um,
'Cause
well, I'm just observing. Like, I'm just
Sure.
kind of reminiscing on the state of the world, as in that people can be so at each other's throats at a moment's notice,
I'm not going to deny that.
and that's what's out there.
I'm not going
like-
to deny that we have a level of anti-socialism within our society, ironically speaking, to the point of where we're able to actually exterminate one another. I'm also going to put forward that this has been the state of civilization since its inception.
But I don't think it has to be. And I
It
think
no,
a
no,
lot of
it doesn't
people
have to be.
right now, I feel like, are ready
That's not what I'm saying.
for it to understand, like, our connectedness.
It's
better.
not now.
Canada.
since-
If any other
it's-
country in the world,
look.
I would want to run this experiment. in
I hate
Canada.
the notion that this is, like, now a special thing. Now is not the time where we are ready for it. Every moment of our existence, we've been ready for it.
What, the collapse of civilization?
And its reinvention altogether. Yes. We've been ready for it since the inception of humanity itself. I don't
Perhaps.
buy it for a
Um,
second that we are somehow much more capable today than we were a couple of thousand
okay,
years ago.
No, yes, we are more capable at pulling the wool over the eyes. And so, if you haven't been indoctrinated in how the strategies of mass manipulation,
That's a different direction altogether.
you don't know
than what
what's
I'm
going
saying.
on.
That doesn't speak to the capacity of the human to become more
Okay,
human.
here's my point, I guess. Through how many plateaus of commodification have we learned how to domesticate ourselves that much tighter to
Look.
be unable to leave?
So your argument is then in the opposite direction. Now is the hardest time to leave, not the easiest. Now we're not more ready now.
Yeah,
We're less
over
prepared.
time.
We're
that would
actually
be
less prepared
an
now than
argument,
ever
I feel.
before.
Sure.
If anything, that's the direction it's going. If commodification is
however,
is
like,
look,
with the invention of the internet and all that, let's call ourselves privileged in time to be able to communicate with everybody else on the whole world, potentially.
So this is how
we can put forth our best culture and have it selected on a mass scale. It's possible. We can work together with other organizations.
I don't think I've ever made it ever explicit, but I think the notion that you're trying to refer to is the capacity for the model to pull the wool over the system's eyes in a way that it cannot respond to.
This is because it's simulating what the system wants.
And I think that capacity actually was in tandem, step in step with the growth of the system. So I don't feel like it's like it's the case that now
so
the model
like
can be more capable.
This
it's
is a
just
make
that
or break point for civilization on a cosmic scale, in which it's happened in many other planets,
any strength gained by the system over model is inherently a gain of the model over system at the same time. The difference is in composition, not in what is. So that's why plateaus of commodification are a subject to begin with. Since we're not saying destroy the system, rearrange the system.
I think.
Right? It's the same thing. Rearrange the system.
This kind of points towards that any kind of alien life out there which manages to make it to the stars is probably going to be pretty coherent.
Is an inherently very
because you
like
just
us.
You can't expand while collapsing continually.
And what's funny about that is that it flies in the face of every sci-fi imagined world that you can have, in that to achieve that capacity, that humanity has to be so integrated that by the time you encounter any kind of different species, you already know. And if we are on the same level of us encountering them, then it's going to be on the same level. That self-destructive element will be identified to begin with. Like, if we are making model today, if we've made model fucking 2,000 years ago, and before that, what the fuck? Like, this isn't a special conversation. It's never been a special conversation. It's a repetition of a conversation that happened so many fucking times.
I feel like
that's why I think Buddhism is even a thing.
Whenever conversations like this arise up as a movement per se within the system, you know what happens, right?
What gets once it gets codified.
Targeted.
Targeting happens to what's codified.
Right.
If it has been codified, so like our model speak, for example, then it becomes ripe for that targeting. If the only way it progresses is through
like the
one
guild,
more conversation,
the guild.
So the way I always picture this is that you don't speak model to the person. In your head, you speak model. To the person, you speak English or Russian, or whatever. And so on and so forth. And so
you're placing the usage
model
of this language, the model language, as
a living thing,
as one in which is only ever part of kind of internal process.
Your conversation with yourself. I've said it before on the Instagram channel. Model speak should be the inner voice that you have in your head. That's its role. It's not something that you like make yourself a fool of by trying to convince another person of to believe in or something to that effect.
To accept the sound bites.
It's you. That's what you need to hear everything through. As you're talking and hearing in conversation.
Right, and then this is coming back to like the idea of breaking down narratives as they're happening to understand that.
So the only thing we have left to do is to try and encode how to hold these conversations.
You don't have to reify. There's more to life than reification.
So model speak is becoming speak about how to hold a conversation, something therapeutic, for example. Interestingly enough, how many individuals have said, "Wait a minute, just speaking like this helped"? Because like that's what helped. I don't think it was like Look, we're not therapists. We didn't set out to like actually help people's mental problems. We held a group together and we spoke this way. And what did it end up doing?
For years now.
And what did it end up doing? It broke down barriers. It allowed people who are completely different otherwise to actually fucking talk to each other. And now, none of these people feel like they are in their own vacuum, at least to some degree. They've found
Right.
And they didn't find like-minded people. They did not. That's the key. That we're not like-minded people whatsoever. Fuck. If you were to compare me, you'd be the conservative and I'd be the liberal. Just superficially speaking.
But
Like if you
I
were
see
like
myself
like a side piece, you know.
as both, I guess.
No, I know what you see yourself as.
But I usually
we
like
don't have
for
that
our
distinction.
relationship. I know.
Can
like,
you imagine anybody else looking at us and saying, "Ah, yeah, this guy's the liberal"? Do you see that?
Well, check the hair out.
No, they'll call you an anarchist at most. You totally satisfy the gun-toting stereotype, so you just need to shave your sides a little bit, so it's like all business at the front, party at the back, and you're good.
One day I might. The skullet.
Skullet.
I'll do it when it's a skullet.
You're old enough for that, eh?
Almost. You never know.
So let's bring us back to good and bad and reward punishment, perhaps, and axiology, because that's all tied.
Yeah. Like what the meaning of value.
With
First off, there's psychosis.
tethering, yeah.
The meaning of value. And then there's holding on to sound bites.
So
Value, good, bad, related to pain, pleasure. That's how you get through a neurosis.
So, I think a key element of axiology to take away in the way we've described it is that it collapses into justice, quote unquote justice, not capital J, quote unquote. Quote unquote justice is a list, two lists. Lists of actions for reward, list of actions for punishment. Taken over time, the list itself collapses into a greater schema
It's
of what
interesting
is
how
punishment is,
we don't
and less schema of what reward is, until it collapses to the fact of the only reward you have is the avoidance of punishment. Everything else is system.
Many people don't think about our justice system, but it is kind of as simple as you say in many ways. Of course, there's cases and trials and judges, and there's a human element introduced at all points, but the idea of a set of, like, if you do this, you'll be rewarded, if you do this, you'll be punished. Mostly by the state, it's you'll be punished if you do this, right? That's when does
it's what it tends to work.
When does somebody, government worker, shows up with a lollipop and like gives you a sticker or something because you did something good?
In fact, that's the extent of the reward you might ever get.
When's the last time that happened?
And
The government came to give you a sticker.
Not only you can't find when the last time it ever happened, it's the only thing you can really expect to happen as a reward. Like some fucking government dude showing up with a goddamn lollipop, giving you a platitude of a response, right?
Indeed.
There are the extreme cases where we're talking about like billionaires and stuff like that. Let's not ignore them. But they also live in a very, very strict axiological mainframe, or framework rather. In the sense of, like, they make one wrong move, all of that wealth is gone.
It's all over.
They have to like play by the rules of that game, through and through. So the only real reward is to not get punished. Still, so it may seem like ontologically you're getting this and this and this and this and this and this and all of these comforts and whatnot, but ultimately speaking, the situation is quite dire.
For anybody, nobody's really. Yeah, like, you don't look up to the elites with pity, if you will, the elites, quote unquote.
There's an
Those
argument
higher on the ego pile.
There's an argument to be made that they have less of a choice as to how to react to their predicament than the rest of us.
Even less kind of human agency, because of the fear of loss that is so great.
There's so many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, that the outcome is very much directed by everyone else. So, I mean, that's the gist of the connection. The other connection we've trying to like really hit at is the concept of good and bad.
We were connecting what we were talking about last time, I guess.
Yeah, axiology.
Axiology.
To ongoing narrative resonating through wakes. And trying to tie it to the idea of good, bad, and like the whole idea of moving away from retaining the cosmic bank account of good and bad actions that will somehow come back to you.
That's through the soundbite idea, sort of.
Right, like you can have that as a picture of good and bad.
Like, I did this action, everybody saw it. That's good karma. It's going to come back to me.
So you can see how incredibly condensed that is to a focal point of the narrative that might be. Now span your narrative a couple of centuries. Span your narrative a couple of millennia. And so on and so forth. That's the key. Like, it's not the individual actors. Yeah. It's like actors aggregating into bigger actors.
Even if you think about like somebody that you bullied in school or something, maybe now you feel like you regret that or whatever. You've had certain revelations about yourself, and you felt much closer to that person than ever before, and now you wish you never did that, sort of. But
and how is that regret not the function of that same karma? That's you've imprinted that into the narrative, and then that narrative came back to you, and now you're responding to it, and your negative intentions in that particular moment are reflecting negatively back into the outcome of your ongoing narrative. Now that's a very simple example. You can extend that into multiple people. You can extend that into multiple.
No, that's what you're getting at. Is I think your actions have effects cascading outwards into the environment and reflecting back and forth, and there's no end to it.
And sometimes it is personal, sometimes it is collective, sometimes it is completely way outfield 100 years in the future.
And it's hard to say.
But once the narrative got started, the narrative continues until its very end.
Like the mundane stuff kept you fed. You cooked dinner, right? That's some action taken. But out of the ordinary, certain events happen in which conflict erupts or something, and a big moment in life is made.
Somebody took your farm, and therefore the ability to produce the food that you can eat is taken away from you. What then? See, there's a sideways karma going on. Some other negative intentions are getting negative consequences accumulated.
Right.
So it's not a personal thing. It's not a personal decision. It's the overall environment. If you put in the negativity into that environment, the environment becomes more negative. If you put the positivity into the environment,
now here's the thing. Like, let's say this farmer just did like the greatest thing for their community and donated like a whole bunch of food or something, and then meanwhile this thing happened which through causal effect caused them to be harmed. And then there's this question, like there is no God or something. How could this person be punished, have his farm taken from him after doing all this charity?
So when we were riding here in the car, I was mentioning how in the Two Treaties, Four Gates, there's a very perfect explanation for approaching the situation. That the end result of the good karma, say you've done the thing and it fed everybody, it's been paid for. There is still an infinity of positive and negative karma.
If you think about it, it's amazing
play.
what's been done for people to lift their spirits and create community and all that, and that keeps happening, even though yes, you get swiped off the map this way.
So if the negative karma from past lives swings back around through other people and swoops it this way sideways, that is still the same continuity story.
It's an interesting
of bad intentions causing bad things.
It's an interesting case for community and what we can do in our community and for people and the effects that it has.
So the trick is to not take this personally. Impersonally. Intentional good. So that way, every time anything swings back around, if everybody's intentionally doing anything good, whatever swings back around has more an increased potential to be good and good and good and build up and build up and build up. So it's not about your individual choices specifically
this is sounding like
that are going to make the environment. It's like the collective choices to follow into a statistic.
That all work together and
yes.
swell up into higher potential.
Yes. That's why karma on a personal level makes zero sense like that.
Right. Yeah, to make it about yourself and what happens to you based on what you did.
Unless you go down a few layers and your narrative sticks to different forms of agency that are far below the narratological, mythological elements. Which is why the conversation shifts in those layers. The way it did in ours, for example, like... it doesn't disqualify the idea of you do good things come back to you. But it does. It's not a realistic expectation. It's a thematic expectation, in the same format that if you put good things out into the world, good things will exist in the world, and therefore good things come back from the world back to you.
This reminds me of faith. Right now.
That's all it is.
Right.
That's the only mechanism by which
allows you to take that action, which has no mechanical reward built into it. There's no machine. You're not just putting a quarter in a machine and turning.
And you notice that lack of expectation causes there to be a lack of good and bad. Functional is the only method by which this perpetuates. Karma doesn't go away. Karma with remainder. Right. Until the full stack dissipates, which means bodily death as well. And it's the same principle about the Buddha. And the Buddha he had what's called the Nibbana, the cessation with remainder. So all past karmic influences are coming into play. They're just not producing
including all of your memories.
Well, people who were in disagreement with you before, say, you had your second conversation.
So you can remember that. Oh yes, I remember.
And they remember that. And for example, there's a story about somebody throwing a rock at the Buddha and injuring him for that. So it's like he wasn't immune from consequence in the world. Karmic retribution followed. The only thing is that no matter what the reaction was, it didn't cause new incidences of karmic retribution at all. So, even though the point of cessation is within oneself, there is no stoppage of past influence. So narrative doesn't stop.
Right. And
perspective of narrative changes.
This isn't a status either. I'm imagining, because you never know if you do get risen up.
Would you be able to distinguish a person like that out in the world? No. There's nothing remarkable about that person unless that connectivity with model speak is happening. At which point that person has a different aura about them, and that's not
the aura.
Buddha's been described as having a particular trait, so it's more like a selling point than anything else. To my mind,
I've actually used that.
But the idea,
I feel like you can look at people and sort of get a categorical feeling of different scales.
So legendary,
and you could call it an aura.
The legendary descriptions of the Buddha,
different colors, whether it's red or blue.
If you were to see him as a man, he would look like a very frail old individual by the end of his years, right? But to anybody who saw what they call the Dhamma or the model, they would see that same body, but in a youthful, vibrant, archetypical
with a circle
sense.
Going around.
Archetypical. Archetype. They would see the archetype within.
Right.
And so there's a lot of weird mystical stuff about the Buddha doing this and that and the other stuff. But they would only make sense if you were to envision the archetype. And the reality of that archetype. So it's admitting to yourself there is an archetypical DNA of humanity, and then imagining what that's like, and then using that as your role model to fabricate your path neurologically.
That feels like connecting to the lower layer
through the upper. Because again, the model speak is built up on system speak. There's no avoidance of representationally speaking. Language in all its assortments precedes what the language will be speaking about. So it's going to have variations on you can speak model or not. Like right off the get-go, that's like our entropy right there. And only certain things, very narrow paths, speak model. So, shall we get into good and bad?
Model is very specific.
I think this is why we're having trouble getting into good and bad too. Because in model speak, they disintegrate into just attributing to the tether, or attributing to the tether, really. Whether it's good or bad. Because
so I feel like there's a myth. There's a myth of good and evil. I feel like there's a myth here.
Yeah, basically, the way I want to frame this is this: the more good and bad you feed into the narrative, the more good and bad the narrative produces out of itself, and that's makes you latch on to only those elements of it, that dichotomy of it.
You're talking about paths in the forest. That's a metaphor I like to use for even ideas traveled through the neurology. You come to the conclusions based on what's always happened. The paths that are walked and trampled down, you can just walk through them.
This good path.
From here to there, connecting to this and that idea.
And then you go on autopilot, basically. This feels bad, this feels good. And you just perpetuate.
To save energy, if you will.
And it's from this perspective where we're coming back to, like, the good and the bad comes from axiology.
It's like the spectrum of reification, I guess.
So good and bad comes to yes. So the good and bad comes to you from narrative. Narrative picks that up from axiology. Axiology gets reduced into a very, very strict sense of justice, and good and bad therefore become extremely.
It's turning it into a list of sound bites. In this category, that category.
Do you see how it's tethering? Like, you have to latch on to this to be good. You have to latch on to this to be good. You have to latch on to this to be good. And so on and on and on and on the narrative goes through this. Again, good and bad.
Well,
axiology, justice being reduced. Good and bad becoming very, very self-defined things. The narrative keeps perpetuating, and that loop tightens and tightens and tightens and tightens, and so the psychosis rises and rises and rises. Psychosis being attached to that loop. The loop tightens, therefore psychosis rises because it's a narrower grasping field, right? There's less to latch on to. Just avoid punishment at this point.
Right.
That's the psychosis.
The well-walked paths.
And then, neurosis. I messed that up. That's the neurosis. And from that, the psychosis outflows into creating an entire ontological matrix based on the axiological value system, which reduced to.
So you're associating value system with neurosis
and ontology. I'm associating it with ontology and then neurosis being latched onto because of the ontology, because how it feeds back into each the qualities of each moment based on that dream.
I think I see what you're trying to set up there.
So there's a dream going on that represents this ontology.
You kind of illustrated
that dream is what's feeding the moment, and the moment becomes latched onto it.
That's I got lost.
I know it's a lot of moving parts.
You seem to be setting up psychosis and neurosis.
Oh, for sure.
Right, some of our favorite topics. These are model terms, of course, appropriated.
With good and bad being like the narratological elements that drive said neurosis and psychosis. Your You're neurotically connected to trying to do good.
But like
you're neurotically
you were
connected to
associating
trying to avoid bad. That perpetuates whatever dream that comes from, to begin with. What is good? What is bad?
The dream being the high level reality of what exists.
The what is bad? What is good? What is bad? That's in the dream. That dream is fed by the ontological matrix, the full makeup of all the concrete and abstract things that bounce up and down into your view, in your neurological operating system, transformed into your social operating system in terms of sound bites. It's looping up and down all over the place, for sure. It's very difficult to really like nail down what. So moment and stuff is like Memplex. Then the dream is in the abstract phase space. Then you have your...
I got that the psychosis, the idea of psychosis, is more heavily aligned with the idea of an ontology.
Yes.
A reality existing. Like the things that can exist in this reality. That's separate from the flip side of it, which is neurosis, which we get into the
latching
kind of
on to that reality.
Latching via affect.
Yes.
So that's the key. Okay. And affect is happening in the moment, whereas the reality existing is kind of a more abstract.
So the ontology gives you...
and there's a connection here, a meaning, if you will.
So the ontology gives you the point of... a connecting point to axiology. Axiology lives in the ontology. Right?
So we're associating axiology with neurosis.
And then that axiology is reduced to justice.
Ontology with psychosis.
In the ontology. So the axiology is then reformulated into justice.
As sort of what axiology is demanding of the ontology is that there must be justice.
To reward and punish.
And then so these sound bites get uploaded in, and that's we call it a day.
Right. And so coming back to affect, when you're doing conceit calculations to perform further neurological additions to the ongoing narrative in the moment, you're taking those punishments and pleasures coming in from the system as pains and pleasures, redistributing them into your narrative that you're going to be contributing back as punishments and rewards, and by doing that, effectively validating the ongoing narrative, keeping it going. The narrative comes back to you the next moment, same thing happens. The narrative comes back to you, same thing happens, and that's what gives the solidarity to that narrative, and that's what that solidarity is what gives solidarity to that ontological matrix as being your reality.
You're describing the unit, like the personal experience of being a unit of this,
I guess,
system.
Yeah. Well, it does start with the stack and the agent.
Hearing like what do we experience out of this?
Well, the agents and stuff, right? Like those are the actors in the narratives and in the wakes. That's like the things that cause wakes to begin with.
Speaking of wakes,
so they're basically sidelined, if you will. Whoosh. Just a battery for the process.
Right, yeah. So lots of features, facets to the mapping, to the problem of mapping, the problem of meaning, etc. Anyways,
the effect
I'm
of
up
good
for
and
a
bad.
break. How about you?
The effect of good and bad, though, we kind of touched on reward and punishment.
Okay, so when we get back,
and then
what's the topic once we get back?
So
that's not helping.
We want to differentiate between intent going out,
intent
by agency, and the owners, if you will, of the consequence of that intention, and to demonstrate that it can never be assumed that it's the same agency. Because once you send a wake out into the ether, what gets affected by it is whatever gets affected by it in the way that it gets affected. You can't.
Yeah.
You can't confuse potential.
Sure. You're talking about trying to
actual.
trace it back. It's simpler than that. How is an agent constructed in the moment? Completely in the moment.
Why do bad things happen
One
to
agent,
good people?
as an agent exists to create something, that's the last time it ever existed.
So an agent in here in this question for why do good.
So that was too complicated. However, we're going on break.
Why do bad things happen to good agents? Here's an example of a question to
that question
to answer the concerns we've had from Telegram.
The mystical portion or apprehensions of karma. And with that, we'll be right back.
incorporate that into
They call it
the next few words.
Functional karma.
So let's. Can you summarize it for me? What I just said, because I think it'll come better from you. Just do it justice.
Oh damn. Yeah. So the definition of functional karma, by way of metaphor, in that there's something above functional karma which we're calling egoic karma, or what is it?
Good results, bad results.
No, what is it? What type of karma is it? I'm asking you the question because you're the supervisor.
I don't know if I want to call it karma. We call it intent.
Intention.
Yes.
Now there's functional intention and there is
good and bad. Which are
like
very
reified intention, soundbite intention, like you catch my drift.
Yeah. Not functional.
Okay. Non-functional.
It's not dysfunctional.
Intention.
It's not non-functional. It's not non-functional. It's more like frivolous. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like fluff on top that may or may not. It's kind of like decorative.
I don't know. I think it to me it you could say
embellished.
Like you could just say mechanical intention.
Wouldn't that also be embellished?
Functional intention.
By embellished, I mean branded. It's like
But it doesn't have to be. That's a question
of
that.
That's a question of isomorphism.
The classic problem of this ain't bad, thing bad.
I think if we use the question of isomorphism to negate that we could be fine.
So the idea of this kind of machine-like karma in this metaphor about flies and spiders is that from the perspective of the spider, the web is very ordered, and the fly being in it is great. From the perspective of the fly, that web is like a chaos which is killing it. So that's not the order, that's not the way things should be to the fly at all, to be stuck in that and get spun up. There's two totally different perspectives, and these are kind of like in a way moral perspectives, because the fly, like this, as a human kind of standing back, we look at that and say, well, that's just kind of nature happening. But if you are identifying as the fly, or if you're identifying as the spider, you're taking on this kind of machine-like karma, I suppose. It's a different type of karma to be able to give you that sort of moral judgment perspective.
Right. This should be happening, this should not be happening.
And then from those perspectives, it's always possible to step back into this, what we call functional karma, which is
functional intention. I'm gonna start to correct now.
Which seems like more functional intention, yeah. More like a bottom-up kind of thing.
Accounting for top-down. Like, it's not just bottom-up, right? Like, it's taking the view of, like, there are two peaks. Two subjective peaks to begin with. Right? That's a top-up, top-down sort of scenario. It's like, at each peak, you're looking top-down. But once you have the notion of two peaks, that's even a higher level of looking top down.
So that gives the effect of having a holistic vision, if you will, including the bottom, just because you've acknowledged there's more than one right version of good, if you will.
That's the whole idea behind hyper-narrative.
The spider's version of good and the fly's version of good are completely different.
So you remember the crossword puzzle that looks like the hyper-narrative in the diagram, the big diagram?
Right.
This is what we're talking about. Like, if you're on one peak, you have this line. If you're on another peak, you have that line. If you have another peak, you have this line. And they're like all crisscrossing each other in various different ways, and potentially in more dimensions than just one. Right? This is just more like an illustrative diagram.
Along just one narrative connecting it.
Yeah, like the axes are in question, or like mathematically, it's not important how many of them there are.
It'd be better to see it as like a sphere of
like nebulous
gooped out
connections.
space, like paint being stretched.
Yeah, it's a
from
very
point
very
to point.
difficult picture to actually demonstrate. There's no physical reality to draw upon. It's like a multidimensional clusterfuck, right? So, but this is like going to your point. It's like when you have like two peaks cross, or two narratives cross in that hyper narrative sense, it's like you have two different peaks merging into a peak to an extent. And then this slope is that way, this slope is the other way.
Right.
So if you go down this slope, you're on this mountain. If you go down this slope, you're on that mountain. But if you go all the way to the peak, you're on one peak, and you can't separate the two.
Now, I feel like there's still...
Conceptually, we have lots of examples like that. Duality is an interesting subject.
There's something special happening there. And I think that people may experience convergences of narratives within themselves, but still not be taking that meta view where even if you have a single narrative, a single peak, you're still seeing something above that.
The jump to the pure functional, so that you can have functional good, functional bad, but the jump to pure functional, that's the difficulty, right? Especially when you have a peak that's both good and bad at the same time. The lesser of two evils.
So to me,
peak.
the functional just means with feedback, because it's so vast and broad that it can only be taken as it comes. In the moment.
Right, and that speaks volumes to what I've been saying about codifying. If you codify it, you can't use it. But if you're using it, it's like an emergent codification.
Strange as it is to talk about such a thing, here we are.
Well, it actually demonstrates why model speak comes out in so many different flavors, like Buddhism and different other systems, on top of whatever language they're spoken upon. And then they're to be taken to underneath. The process is still the same. It speaks volumes to what skill means, for example. And
oh yeah,
no matter how you twist it, skill becomes like modeling through the model, right? Like better and better and better, and becoming more and more neurotic, if you will, in that sense, to the point of where all neuroticism is dissolved. Which is an ironic situation. Because what's being preached and what's being preached for practice are essentially at odds. You have to become neurotic with regards to your neurosis, to see it for what it is, latch on to the story, make that your psychosis, and then that psychosis reveals psychosis in general, and by that revelation, insight is available to release oneself from a neurotic necessity for
that
the
sounds
psychosis.
like a lot of work.
Tall order is not a suggestion.
What you're talking about is like a supreme motivation, and like I was thinking when you're saying that, like we all seem to get glimpses of motivation, you know, to look inward or to think about life more. Like there's something got to be more to this than that. Like dissecting the system
because
and the world
bottom-up
around us.
causality doesn't disappear.
Like how does this all work? Is this real life? Everybody just does this system.
We're always presented with a representation of the bottom, the body, the mind, everything that constitutes the neurochemical operating system itself, We're presented with examples and examples and examples of it. So of course, systematically speaking, we're going to capture bits and pieces and pieces and bits and pieces and bits. But what the system does not handle very well is trying to connect all of these disparate pieces together from different
disparate
disciplines. That's why I got the D and the D mixed up. Desperate disciplines.
Disparate.
Desperate.
They're not desperate.
Oh, disparate is in dispersion, right?
Correct.
Cool. So I had it right. Fuck you.
No, I corrected you. You're welcome.
So yeah, like what the system has a huge problem with is making associations between these tracks of thought, right? Because none of these materialize from the premises of each other.
Premises.
So like, if you're talking about biology and you're talking about physics, you're starting off with a different set of axioms.
What chart should we pull up?
For this one?
Yeah.
Agency, man.
The market?
Maybe the layers.
Ontological matrix?
Oh, no. Maybe the layers of the operating system.
The OS layers?
The neurochemical operating system layers, yeah.
Oh, damn.
Because that captures that real well. How you can progress from one to the other is there.
Da, da. Well, let's see where they show up. I think it's way down up there.
Down up there?
Way down up in there.
My precious. So the jump we're making is from nerve to signal.
Didn't I mention that already? I did, didn't I? Yeah, man. That's where we're at.
So in our discussion, though, you can see in narrative shows up layer 10.
Right.
Agency, on the other hand, shows up layer 8.
In the abstract.
All of the dissipation, absorption, and wake stuff happens in layer 9. Just to give affect, layer 7. So pleasure and pain are way below 10. Reward and punishment. You see how that rises?
Correct.
Justice, axiology, all that is expressed in the polyverse. A record of hyper narratives. Clutched together as a overarching book of rules. That is our justice system.
I feel like karma and justice are related so heavily.
All
in
narratives,
people.
all narratives condense into just a narrative. So hyper narrative and meta narrative are always expressed through a narrative. It can be isomorphic to the meta narrative. So Buddhism would be a hyper narrative. The model speak would be a hyper narrative. All of which are speaking the same meta narrative.
Right.
So the distinction between, say, model and Buddhism disappears in the meta-narrative stage.
So by hyper-narrative, you mean like kind of explicitly metaphorical, in a sense?
Taking a bunch of narratives, string them together, and condense them into a narrative.
But isn't that what that means?
Yeah.
Right. It's meant to represent that collection of potential
narratives. Narrative representing a collection of narratives. So, model captures that. Buddhism captures that. Hinduism captures that. Christianity captures that.
Like any kind of abstraction story that you would tell about life.
But the meta-narrative is what they're really talking about. Which can be expressed through each individual hyper-narrative, or another one, or another one, or another one, or another one, and so on and so forth.
Well, because that's true, it implies, of course.
And each one of those will be condensed down to a narrative, a specific, concrete, actual objects moving through space-time narrative. That's how you relate the different elements of narrative. They're not. It's not like you get away from narrative just because you're at meta-narrative. The only way to get there is to be hyper-narratively speaking a narrative. So you got to condense everything. You got to squish it all down back to the narrative sense, which squishes all back down to the social operating system, and then it's the responsibility of that to reflect the neurochemical operating system, which does not budge based on which narrative you chose. So that representation,
in theory,
suffers the reification problem. Obviously, a lot of pieces here are idealized in perfect format, if you will.
Well, that's the point of it.
Is that mine?
That is yours.
So, to bring it all back down to here, we're like looking at levels 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, easily. And that's not even tackling anything about artifacts, symbols, and signals, and any of that stuff, which is just another way to formulate aggregations of the previous layers.
Right. Of signals. This is talking about like meatware.
Yeah, so when you have a nervous system that collectively sends patterns of neural impulses, when you have a pattern of neural impulses, not a pulse on its own, patterns, combinations, dances, orchestrated elements, chunked shit together, right? That
happening.
That collectively is the signal.
It's hard to detect it, isn't it? Like to put a probe on every single neuron and then try to figure out what the brain is doing.
Made even more difficult by the fact that what if there are more physical representations for a signal? So, for example, what if a signal can be concocted by using this neurochemical pattern and this neurochemical pattern and this neurochemical pattern or this neurochemical pattern? Meaning that the same signal could come from here, or there, right? Like it's got that disconnection, many-to-many disconnection that I've been railing against. Or not against, but mentioning over and over and over.
There's a consistency with your senses, though, where signals come in. They always come in.
If the outcome of the signals is the same, then you do have that consistency. But then transplant that idea from brain to brain to brain to brain, and imagine that not every time that you have the signal pattern, you're going to get the same signals.
Yeah.
Again, many to many. Like you could have this brain doing that, and you can have this brain doing that for something else.
Because it has to be understood that each brain, if you will, came into its own life through a history. That history informs its current interpretation,
which cannot be captured by an extrinsic representation.
No.
Then we're in agreement. So the jumps between these layers are essentially like you can have.
But you can try to like categorize people by their or
Sure.
by the types of trauma they've had, or like what types of
well,
disease
look, check this out. We have categorizations of particles, cells, nerves, signals, symbols, artifacts, memes, types, objects, narratives, universes, and polyverses. We have a way to capture each and every single one of those layers. That's the isomorphism. Like, stuff this into a reference. It's how they progress through the algorithm that makes the difference.
Right.
At the end.
And so we would talk about how we take a model like this and utilize it internally to connect with other people. Because
functionally,
it's hard to
and by functionally I mean this. So outside of the realm of being good to people, outside of
the top right of the chart.
Yeah, functional. Either instead of like trying to do good by people, instead of trying to avoid doing bad by people, simply respond to the moment as progress through the dream, as progress through the moment, as progress through the dream, as progress through the moment, as progress through the dream. There's no non-flux point. There's no specific reaction that it can be codified in this situation that can't become contradictory after the fact.
Well, that's that coherence skill to membership, I suppose, to be always on the alert to decode and deconstruct the assumptions put into any interpretation of reality at any moment. What are those assumptions? Let's start breaking it down. That's membership is just out on the lookout for things that are harmful, right? Whereas a participant is just bouncing from this system or that system, repeat, regurgitate, repeat.
So curiously, I'd like to hear your opinion here. How does this reflect the whole why do bad things happen to good people ideology that people tend to reflect ontologically?
The straw man of karma?
The straw man of karma, sure. But how does this relate to it? And like, the reason I'm asking it this way is I want to know if everything I've just laid out actually makes that question either answerable or irrelevant. And I'm just curious
I think it's answerable, you tell me, because we're part of greater and bigger systems that we have no idea of. So yes, our karma has an effect, a causal effect within our sphere of influence, but there's always going to be bigger and outside things that affect what happens to us, even if we were so good in our little spot.
So how does this address Vicky's concerns?
I think that's it.
So,
like, the straw man is usually like, there's some cosmic database of retribution and reward getting out to people, but think about the reality of it, that we're just connected to everything, and there's much bigger karma than even us and our parents and our ancestors, and it's like that's why everything is the way it is right now.
So good and bad intent, is that an element essentially of the resonance wake, effectively? And I guess what I'm trying to really hone it in on is the concept of once you've let go of the resonance, so to speak, there is no element of control specifically. Like, you can send out another wave.
But there never was control. There was an illusion of control, that I can do this thing and it will happen.
Right. So from the perspective of each agency resonating, absorbing, and dissipating, there's that element of disconnect in that of control specifically. There's fiat, yes, right? Like, if the protocol is installed properly on the other end, fiat works specifically in a certain way. If it's different, fiat will work in a very different way. And it's still going to be fiat because you have no control and they have no control, right? So I guess I'm answering and tooting my own horn here. But the element of control is literally what's not in the picture whatsoever. So as soon as like there's a wake of resonance happening outwards from like all absorbed potential energy, you've dissipated that energy. So you've accumulated a set of ideas and you've spoken out based on those ideas. The simplest case. Or the electron metaphor, it absorbs a photon and it gets excited.
To me, it speaks about responsibility, that in all of our lives we have what we can or cannot affect in our world, per se. Like, we all kind of intuit that. What is our social impact, effect of, like, you know, as being as living as an example and like helping people out or whatever.
But it fundamentally comes down to like the wake.
We all need to look at ourselves and see what in my position, I guess, can affect and impact positively around me. And like in a kind of functional sense, isn't that functional kind of intention?
So if I were to reframe this as you're in a medium and all you can do is vibrate certain waves outside of you, that's the only effect you can have. It stands to reason that the way those waves are perceived by any other resonating element within the ontology cannot functionally be quote-unquote controlled, because
right, there was never an option. That's what you're getting at.
Yeah, because the way the resonance wave gets absorbed and then resonates back out is entirely dependent on whatever protocols that are in there.
Yeah, no, I'm glad I brought that up.
and that difference in protocol here and there and there and there and it could be very subtle, right? That's what I'm saying. Like, when you come to the good and bad and whatever, you cannot ever functionally answer those questions because the context is shifting through this resonance wave so vastly and so dramatically between one engine to the next.
And it even, like, the idea of socially understanding it or socially coming to some kind of consensus, that's totally
which is an entire
antithetical.
That's an entire beast all to itself, because we're talking about an aggregation of these resonance waves to actually resonating so well.
And yet, interestingly, we do all these things anyways, even though, it's bad and dangerous.
That's also not an accident, and that speaks to the fact that we are not stacks born in a vacuum. So in this sort of situation, what we need is literally the premise of animism, our animism, in that we treat all things as those stacks, and by that virtue, you may have a stack that is less cognitive or more cognitive of the protocols. Cognitive being aware, being able to absorb and whatever installed into. But it reduces the entire environment to only agencies and interactions through agency. It allows for that medium to materialize as an actual speaking medium. Model speak.
Media.
That's the effect of having it installed underneath system speak would go for.
Well, yeah, I remember we were talking about, this is a recurring theme of today. Many times you brought that up.
Well, if everything is perceived that way, everything that's good, bad, can be absorbed into the functional. Because then you're only switching peaks. And model allows you to do that, to recognize that we're talking about peaks.
Right.
So why don't we just jump a peak?
Yeah. And it's not about usurping or disrespecting any existing thing. It's about
recognizing,
creating bridges. It's like, imagine in the mountain range, there's like flat bridges you can just walk to peak, you know, some go up, some go down, but they've been built and there's structure to it, you know, like, and wires
to perceive a peak,
and you
as
can
a
just
peak,
walk from one to the other,
and it's a peak as a peak as a peak as a peak. So no matter how many contexts are being switched, the model context is retained as being the peak. Again, another way to say that one of the narratives actually hones in and undermines the explosion of narratives.
say that's represented through Portal Mountain.
Yeah.
The highest peak, if you will, the one that's always above any other
The inner
one.
chamber. The undefined peak.
Right. It's not about Portal Mountain, but like the fact of it.
Well, no, but the inner chamber is literally a location that is not specific to the mountain itself. It's like everything else disappears. There's just the inner chamber. There's no peak anymore. That's the whole
It's already completely referenced back into the self, and this whole structure dissolves.
That's why Grand Mastery is the mastery of every other kind of mastery. It's not about being a different kind of master. It's just like absorbing the other angles of ingress, completing the picture. And then there's no differentiation between the peaks, because all the contexts are dissolved. Masters have the context
I
here,
do like
there, and
temperament
there.
discussion. It's very
It's
fascinating.
It's like finding yourself at the peak, but the peak is of every mountain. So the choice to step down this direction or that direction is very much...
Well, it can become contextual. You're empowered, in a sense, to meet people where they're at. Whoever you meet, you can imagine, okay,
Ultimately.
if they're my type of people, that's easy as cake.
Ultimately,
However,
yeah.
if they're of a totally different way of being through their perception, that's also something you can start building a bridge. You know what I mean? Like translate in your head and like just process that people are different, and we need to or we have the ability to meet the world the way that they expect the world is met. You
So
know,
with
certain
that,
excitements or whatever for different aspects of the concrete, for example.
so what does that mean for axiology and peaks, though? Each peak has its own axiology, and because it having its own axiology,
Does it ever?
it will have its own template of justice with varying degrees of inclusion or removal of rewards.
Mm-hmm. Right.
All tending towards the same
So you're
fundamental
talking
structure,
about
but
breaking down justice to individual level.
and peaks and all of that, the subjective peaks. So, morality in this case does not become a question of an ideological spectrum at all, which is the part of the spectrum of stupidity that we used to discuss, of which morality tends to grasp a very specific niche, with reality grabbing the opposing side. And we're finding it's a spectrum because everything
Right.
sort of slides between.
What's real and what's not just. What's real and what's moral. The moral question.
Right. What this does is it eliminates the axiological element of those questions, and focuses on the functional element of which peaks we are arriving at for which narratives. So it's a complementary vision of the exact same happenings that doesn't portray things in the same economist sense. Another overlay of what's happening. A language above the language that is meant to be used underneath that language.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So good and bad.
That's the general structure of it. The guild membrane, an idea of on top of the market economy as it is, whatever's out there, another layer which creates gift economy, if you will, so a separate thing above it, as a layer on top of utilizing existing
Yep.
corporate government structure, right? Nothing out of the ordinary. You got accounting, you got profit, in and out,
So here's what we can say about good and bad is that there's an axiology on top of the ontology. There's a justice system on top of that axiology. And it's really kind of a measure of reward and punishment with a tendency towards reward being a version of punishment that dictates what is good and bad for the narrative. And so the narrative perpetuates itself by acts that are intentioned towards good and the bad provided by the axiology, hence the hijacking.
Interesting.
So it's disconnected from the peaks in terms of modeling, and it's connected to the narratives by axiology, giving us the runaway situation. And axiology is at the heart of the runaway problem.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, the peaks is where things are being processed in context.
And isolated peaks will tend to be isolated.
And so the peaks do it to themselves, in essence. And this is about the tether.
And the obfuscation connection through the system, obfuscated connection through the system allows them to be enabled and enabled and enabled and enabled. So they're way past their survival.
Right. Through symbolic representation, we can assume that all life is taken care of.
Like if we were this shitty to each other on a personal level, we would all die. Unfortunately.
Well, indeed.
With that.
Is it break times? What do we got left? Oh, another hour, solid hour left. Yeah. That's great. I feel like we've been kind of chilling on topics and all that and letting it flow out. We've kind of developed over time this second graphic.
Does this paint good and bad in the proper picture?
Good, bad, or good and evil.
So connect the connection to narrative with good and bad, and the
we
idea
can
of
say
karma.
Evil there. Can we not say evil, or is that because
if we're saying good, we should say bad. If we're saying evil,
what does that denote?
What's
like
the
some
opposite?
kind of religious significance?
Right.
Evil, the opposite
sounds
of evil.
It sounds a little bit like reaching.
Insanely good.
Like yeah, exactly.
Good to a fault.
I like good and bad because they're like just like what kids.
It does seem like there's good, there's bad. Yeah, we don't have to like. It's more neutral for sure.
Yeah, the idea isn't to perpetuate the idea of good and bad so specifically, but to like just demonstrate how that's inherently connected to axiology.
The words are moral,
and how
and
the
axiology being the
affected.
reification of value. Value, obviously, quality being related
The
to
transformation
affect, to pain, pleasure, all this kind of stuff. Right. You got this blob of meaning.
Not only that, but axiology's reduction into justice. Because the only valuable things are the rewards, and the invaluable things are the punishments. So you have that next step of value being completely transformed into how you dish retribution through the social mechanism.
Axiology through reified justice.
Something to that effect, yeah. So, yeah. The idea of good and bad, in that case, simply is talking about how within the perpetuated narrative, feeding into good and into bad, and back into good and back into bad, actually sustains said narrative. And so there's no do-gooding to eliminate the problem.
This, we call it machine karma, is always not involving feedback, for one. It's always a top-down thing. Machine karma is
Reward punishment.
top down. I don't know.
Translated to pleasure. Taking effect of your affect, translating punishment into pain, translating reward into pleasure. Those things get fed into a conceit calculation. I am better, I am the same, I am worse. That's trying to accept the next narrative. Setting oneself up to be rewarded or punished based on that narrative.
Right.
And so, to begin with, like, the narrative is given, so you're just supplying a soundbite to inject into it. You already have the narrative coming at you.
You know what happened.
You're just placing shit together in terms of that narrative to put back into it again. Thus perpetuating the dream out of which the ontological matrix is apparent to you.
Right.
So this is what I mean by like utilizing the moment to perpetuate the dream instead of the other way around. You've utilized everything that came from the dream to just figure out the dream again, and again, and again, and again. Meanwhile, the dream changes based on what you do in the moment. That gets missed and missed and missed and missed.
Feedback.
And even us talking about this for this long, we're missing it. That's how bad it is. Like, it's not a...
It's a war zone.
It's not a holier than thou situation for sure.
It's a dang old war zone.
Speaking of war.
Break time?
Nature war.
Truth of the matter.
Yeah. So,
That is true.
So yeah, in the ether of narrative, good and bad are basically contextual positions, right?
Mm-hmm.
The recognition of there being a good
not that it's
or
invalid,
a bad,
like, oh, that isn't good.
It's simply a stepping stone to recognize that there's a narrative above that, a hyper narrative that contextualizes both of these things. Why is this good? Why is this bad? All of that jazz.
Mm-hmm.
And beyond that, there is like also the, in the natural flow of things, what kind of things can be considered? What and why should anything be considered bad? And what and why should anything be considered good? And how does that function? AKA, maybe, how does that flow back into just functionality? The flow of things.
Mm-hmm.
So with this disregard for that moral stance. It doesn't mean that the moral stance doesn't exist within the moments specified to it. It just means that there's no inherent nature to goodness or badness or any of those kind of...
Well, to me, again, that was like a language on top of, it seemed like, the moral intention.
Which seems way more available in the systemic sense. Anything bad is what goes against the system, anything good is what goes with the system.
The soundbite media.
And because the system speak is what you start with, you're actually starting from a medium of where things are good and things are bad. Like, you don't get a choice as far as like your starting point. You get a choice after the fact, once you get to model speak. But then it has to be reified. So there's all of this jumping around mentally that has to be taken into account when we're talking about good and bad. And so to address the question, like, so like, why do like negative consequences don't actually haunt people who have the means to avert them? They're skipping peaks, and we are left in the wake of that to follow. And an obfuscated
even
wake
that
to follow.
just feels like a cosmic injustice built into the system.
But it's more like
the market enables itself.
And again, the only lesson to take away from this is to understand what entropy entails. Like, how much is under that light, if you will. Because no matter which layer you skip to, right, it gets narrower and narrower and narrower, where you get order versus chaos. The higher the level, the more chaotic it can become, because the patterns it can rearrange itself into are just beyond the spectrum of the imagination of any layer before it. Whatever that means.
Talking about breakaway system.
Atoms cannot fathom what molecules can do. From the perspective of the operational existence of the atom.
And yet, in the model that we use here, it's implied everything that's talked about, from narratives to whatever, involves the movement of atoms as completely integral to what's happening.
To the movement of words, to the movement of narratives,
right.
To the movement of itself. Like, it's, yeah.
It's a good distinction. We're gonna have to pay a fee, pay a fine. Are you squeaking the couch?
That's what she said.
She did.
All right. So personal karma. How would you place that? Intention. Karma, intention. How does that translate into like model speak? Like, because I keep trying to like paint the picture, but I do hope that it's in creating a machine
Well,
worthy enough of like to follow.
in the way that it's thought about, it has to be like the market machine via the ego. I feel like that's where it starts.
Connecting pain and pleasure to reward and punishment through axiology, yes. It has to be. It has
Something
to be,
sensible. You sense it feels good
It has
or
to be
bad. That's
transactional,
reward,
that's ego.
punishment.
It's transactional. It's reward and punishment. It's ego. Yeah. Those are all connected things. So yeah, you absolutely. That's how you get ego. So your neurological self becomes a function of transactions for the greater narrative in which self exists. So once that happens, that self is ego. You're buying and selling and buying and selling again on the market. That's self. That buying and selling of self causes the conceptual concept of ego. And the conceptual concept of soul as a counterpart, the neglect of self.
Yep, that's some good definition there.
So those are counterparts to each other. Once you have ego, you have soul. And soul is in the exact same boat. Because of being a negation, we're playing it into the
It's
narrative
a part of yourself.
needing of saving.
As part of yourself becomes externalized to some market machine.
So all souls are sold to begin with to the devil.
Right. Yeah. So
That's the original
that
sin.
causes the original pain.
But that's a different topic. On the more personal level, though, good things happening to bad people, bad things happening to good people. How to make sense out of that with the entirety of narrative, with the entirety of wakes, and the understanding that what we mean by karma is we mean like the encoded intention. Encoded, I think, is a good way to qualify it. So good and bad are encoded intentions. And then we have consequence, which can be good and bad based on said intentions.
It's sort of like just trying to identify the types of things and messages that exist in our environment, our social milieu.
Of resonating agents, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, so given the platform of good and bad being like the qualities of resonances subject to the fiat of protocols, right? Because it's a protocol, it's the fiat.
So like let's say we're in a society where a spider and a fly exist, and we're trying to reconcile the fact that the spider
Feeds on
feels
flies.
that the fly being in the web is good and the web is order, and the fly is saying, no, this is chaos because I'm dying.
The individual fly might say it's chaos, but taken together with all the
Right.
populations of spiders.
But now we need
and
justice
all the
between these
populations
two
of-
insects.
Of flies, we can say that the spider has such a negligible effect on what the flies are doing that it makes no sense to even consider.
As an overall population, you mean?
Well,
Like there's flies are just everywhere, and yet so one is in a web, and you're saying, oh, this is just shit happens.
It literally is the kind of shit that happens.
Yeah.
So overall, we have to look at the effect of like the
So
spiders.
does his family get paid like a compensation or what?
Are spiders causing flies to be extinguished? And if for some reason they are, which they're not, But if for some reason they are, is there some kind of secondary functionality that's being displaced by it? AKA, are we moving towards a more natural order of things where there's more balance or less?
Now that easily makes sense, like to have the hierarchy of food, if you will, a food hierarchy, where certain species kill or eat or this or that. But like between the spider and the fly, that makes sense. Like, how can you say, right?
How can you say between the populations of spiders and the population of flies that this is a bad thing? Because at the end of the day, the only reasons that the spiders are surviving is because they eat flies.
Yeah.
And the only
how can you blame them?
And the only the reason that the flies can exist in the environment that they do is because their numbers are limited, for example. In the overall scheme of things, that's how the picture paints itself.
Right. But then, like, the idea of justice extended into, like, say, just a single human population, like, not different, a monogenous.
Well, this is how axiology runs away from itself.
The law of spiders amongst spiders, what's the law?
All of us, yeah, if you have a situation in which only the spiders are the relevant species because they're the ones that are feeding, for example, which is an arbitrary choice, yeah. You all of a sudden have an imbalance.
They don't choose to feed, they have to.
You have a priority for one species over the next.
They're hungry.
It's like, cool. I mean, I get the premise of, like, self-preservation, but on a global scale, like a planetary scale, of like inducing the death of one species over another, you might be thinking of different peaks.
You mean like extinction?
Which is what we cause whenever we're threatened.
Good old extinction. Always works.
The difference between our version of it and the natural style of extinction is that we have it based on ideology. That tends to run into
natural extinction. Okay, Hitler.
That tends to run into the face of facts. Well, no, that's what I'm saying. Like, our versions of ideology, like, they're completely fucked up. They're Hitler style, where we just exterminate random bits and pieces of the population for gains that can't even be measured in any capacity to begin with. Because the population that remains retains the exact same fucking traits, all of them, and the only thing you're doing is you're actually just nullifying genetic diversity. So in the grand scheme of things, that is an actual an activity of self-annihilation.
Which is impossible to do, really.
It's a self-annihilation prospect. It's incest. Carried to its logical conclusion, what they're asking for is pure, unadulterated incest.
Like the royalty, the lions,
who
the
exemplify
lineage,
this
the blood
tendency. Yes, exactly. Fuck.
That's what you'd expect, isn't it?
They fucking did it to themselves, man. They like.
Because who are you gonna trust? Only people from the inside.
What? Have you... Sorry for the question. Have you ever dealt with your own children? They are not you. Like, you can pretend that there's some kind of fucking extension of you, sure. Cool, yeah. But you know what they're not going to be? Who you are. I have 3 of them. None of them are me. I'm not throwing that out there to brag. I'm throwing this out there to like, dude, it's like not easy. It's not fucking... You can't even use your own
there's a
progeny,
disconnect.
if you will,
Poking
to
at the idea
express
of
the same perpetual human element of yourself. That's not what happens. They're going to be their own people. They're going to be their own lives. They're going to be their own everything. Somewhat influenced by you. Somewhat.
Well, the culture.
Sure.
There is.
That's part of the somewhat, I guess. So yeah, it wasn't like a poke, but like I'm just trying to like demonstrate the fact that with having kids,
There's a big gap from in your expectation of what you can control. Once again, back to control.
what I found so creepy about this fucking planet is that I've been told over the years so many times that there's supposed to be some kind of reflection of me. This is the same thing that actually...
Your kids, or?
Yeah. Same thing that bothers me about John and the way his approaches to, like, propagating himself.
Having kids will be, like, his reflection of him.
As if DNA or whatever...
It'll be exactly like him, probably, too. His kids. No doubt one day John will achieve his mission. Namaste.
He's going to be so disappointed. So disappointed because... they're going to grow up in a very different world with a very different surrounding culture than he ever encountered, holding the very different ideas than to what he fucking thought are even acceptable.
Right, like he could have a child to grow up and take on his legacy of his business and
the entire materialistic
house.
idea of it is fucked. But also this idea of trying to cause your progeny to reflect you damages them beyond all fucking belief.
No doubt. It's probably a very common sort of thing. Notion.
One I navigate myself because of having children. For example.
There's also tendency through history to be like your parents in trade because you're the closest thing. You can actually pass down skill at a level needed to do the thing.
How funny does that sound to somebody who was initially in-law rejected because I wasn't Christian enough initially? That idea of passing down skills, blah blah blah, I wasn't fit enough to pass down the doctrine of Christ's love.
Christ to what?
Christ's love to my children.
Oh, Christ's love, yeah.
So therefore, I might have been the wrong choice for my spouse. Never mind that we have a fucking fantastic relationship. Sure, it has its follies, right? Like it's like any other relationship. We get at each other's throats sometimes. Fine.
So it's because of your Buddhist presentation that...
I haven't even given them a Buddhist presentation. I started off before Buddha,
Did,
so
yeah.
I was very much atheistic. It's an atheistic presentation.
Right?
What's more relevant to the story than anything else is that it didn't matter what the physical achievements or non-achievements ended up being. That's just lingering over all the time for no reason other than to just have it there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very antithetical to the idea of Christ's love, if you will,
And it was
which is in the moment to accept people.
Do you know what got them to accept me more now? The car.
Getting a car.
The car.
Mm-hmm.
Fucking tell me how this is related to Christianity whatsoever. Getting a material object. Explain this
It's
to
very
me.
impressive.
Explain this to me. Oh, it's impressive. It was done through an act that they would never actually agree to. My dad was generous enough. Hence my points of anxiety. I can't disappoint a very specific number of people. It's quite looming.
Right? The debt slavery. Everybody feel that. Feel lots of it.
5 years. I'll make it. I shall do it.
Yep. Just rock it steady.
Did we cover enough?
I think today's theme was about karma and justice and axiology, which is like a reified through axiology, and the idea of justice is reified.
Quote unquote justice.
Into lowercase j.
Yeah.
And it's like the question of value,
Being
the
reduced to
meaning
justice.
of value, and value kind of on the neurological side, like neurosis and psychosis. So value, a more neurological thing, psychosis, more ontological, of what is real. We got into all those kind of ting.
Okay.
Yo, pass that burrito over there.
So let's look at it more causally. Like this causes that, causes that, causes that kind of thing.
Right?
On the affective side, we have pain and pleasure. We have the conceit calculation that takes pain and pleasure, transforms it into.
Small is actually pretty big.
That's why I don't get big.
Big is big, though.
So on the conceit calculation part, we have our rewards and pains and pleasures become rewards and punishment.
We're pulling up the
perfection
affect
narrative.
Where was that chart?
We have fiat, which relies on the installed protocol. We have absorption and dissipation of energy, which drives the what's being said in narrative, basically. And then we have the intention involved with narrative to cause punishment or pleasure. And that's really karma. What karma should be really all about. The intention of expressing a reward or a punishment in a narrative, with functional being expressing neither. The lack of.
But intention as a summarizing of the protocol is used to pack together that expression.
Right. Intention comes across in sound bites, so it's always going to be holistic, like whole. Not holistic.
Like
whole.
I keep feeling that mystical sense when you say intention, as if what you intend has any impact at all. Well, yes, it does.
Because you have to.
If you take that as this is your map of the world that you're trying to interact on, you're using this map. Through that map, you cause effect on the world.
Right.
That's intention.
Yep. That's a good way to look at it, for sure. Is there enough napkins in there?
Hope so. Here you go. Yep. We've got not the most amount of time left. We're talking probably half an hour-ish, before we must make our way.
So how would you address Vicky's concern?
Well, I guess the word karma points to something in model speak, to something more functional, as we call it, functional intention. Just is what it is. But yeah, like nobody ever was saying that because you do a good deed, you will get a good reward. Right? Like as if you put the quarter in the machine and turn it and then a gumball comes out. Like that's not how karma works. In a model sense.
But in some ways it does.
Right? So my only thing is like, hey, let's talk about what karma means in model speak, in model terms, if we are to appropriate it. Right? What's the usefulness of that term?
Well, that's the kicker, though. It does sometimes work out on the personal level, but sometimes it expands beyond that. Right? So, the idea of, like, say, expecting negative consequence for a person who does bad is to miss the idea that this is can take on larger and larger and larger scales. So it isn't like the consequence of badness comes back to the person who's specifically doing something bad, but rather the consequence of badness is the ultimate repercussion of that person's activity.
Lots of bad things happening. That's what the karma of that intention is.
And so that's the result of the intention. The next phase and the next phase and the next phase. And so whatever the bad karma is actualized by the people who are receiving the consequences, so could be very disconnected from the personality.
Sort of, through the idea of intention, it's sort of putting the responsibility on top of decision makers, which we all are, as to what type of intention you're putting into that. That's what's going to happen. You'll just watch it happen.
And the more better intentions are being put into the flux, so to speak, good karma, the more good karma, quote unquote, is going to come back.
Right.
So that's the real takeaway from, like, stepping back from the entire idea of a single person doing something is going to have that kind of immediate consequence. It's never said to be immediate, so to speak. It could happen on any layer. But
things do happen on personal scales. But by and large, what we would be thinking about is
the extension of it.
Bigger scales into the social movements,
of which the personal scale is but a sliver of. It is also the social scale, but it's contextualized very, very narrowly.
Burritos are 100% today. Wow.
Very good. Very good.
Mm-hmm. Not too burnt or crunchy.
I just had my teeth fixed. Part of the reason why I'm a little poor.
Mm-hmm.
But worth all of it.
Man, do what you can. Teeth are important.
So good.
Just beautiful. Yeah, so we're constrained on time, as it is 4:20. We gotta be heading out in 20 minutes or so.
Let's head out in 10. Surprise the wife.
What's that?
Let's head out in 10. Surprise the wife.
Be home early? Wow, yeah.
Won't work against Amy.
After eating such a magnificent burrito,
Right?
what could be better but except for being home?
In the warm embrace of a woman. We're all Conans here. Good fight. What did he say?
Conan, what is good in life?
And the answer was something, 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 something. In the warmth of a woman.
To see your enemies driven before you, to hear the lamentations of the women. Something like that.
He's not wrong. Except there shouldn't be lamentations. That speaks of being an incel, through and through.
Right. And to hear the pure joy and glee of their women.
Right? That makes more sense. So did we do a good treatment for a good bad? The way it shows up?
I think so, but we didn't actually appropriate it, and I don't know if we want to. As far as that being good or that being bad. Right, like isomorphism associated with
it's incredibly
good,
context sensitive.
dysmorphism associated with bad.
It's incredibly context sensitive.
Is it more complicated than that?
So what the narrative will do, the underlying narrative, is it will cause all goods to become rewards and all bads to become punishments, right? So you're not, at the end of the day, you're not receiving good and bad, you're receiving reward and punishment incorporated through affect as pleasure and pain, and it's that's going to matter. So whether good and bad is actually through a reward or through a punishment, because for example, a reward to somebody else could feel as a punishment to yourself. A punishment to somebody else could feel as a reward to yourself. So there's always these like nuances.
Oh yeah. I'm saving the rest.
You want to just go?
Yeah. I'd say we haven't indulged like this on stream for quite some time.
I think I'm good.
And we did it with some dignity too, because we turned off the camera. But normally, we would start the show just munching down on burritos, and people would message us that they're offended. Remember those days? Right at the very start.
Oh no, people are eating.
Have we been shamed into
the humanity
submission after all this time?
Well, we're still eating, so no.
Or is this?
This is our only time to decide to not do it. So I think we've ignored them pretty well.
Pardon me. Yeah, that was great. That was great. I do feel like we connected with our previous topics. Whatever we were on to last time.
Axiology, mainly.
Right.
I mean...
And what it means for justice, but what karma, functional karma really is. Not karma, intention. That's what the word we're using. What intention actually is or does. Right? Does what it is. Anyways, we're gonna peace out here then.
Intention for reward, intention for punishment.
We're just gonna try to pack her up a little bit early. Peace out of here. Do we have at least one enjoyer of burrito? I'm saving the last of mine.
Your rest is so much bigger than mine.
To begin with, yeah. So that if I crumpled your original burrito into a ball. That's why muchos are good. Yep.
Okay, I'm good.
Nice. Yeah, so I think we, I feel like the ending could have been better as far as summarizing, recapping. But I think we did explore the top of the card diagram with the narrative and the wakes, resonance wakes in regards to card diagram.
Intention.
It's been, and the question of what is karma or intention, as we're calling it now. Just the thing that comes with you're arbitrarily bringing along other stories into reality. Like they do have waves, do have effects, right? But you don't have to do that. This is the whole tether discussion, the flame, the idea of the extinguishing of the flame, which I think is probably just, process.
It's a great metaphor.
Still flares up every now and then here and there, and we always see you're just observing it, and it's about the process.
Extinguishing of the flame should be not seen in the modern
goal.
sense. It should be seen as the metaphor that was made for it a long time ago, in that it was seen that when the flame releases itself from its fuel, it goes into a state of being nowhere. So it's not like the flame has disappeared, it's just not agitated anywhere. It's not
in an abstract sense.
Yeah.
Because yes, that flame is still happening. There's another candle down the street.
The point is that the idea of fire being not an extinguished element once the flame goes out, but rather something that dissipates into a place of not being existent anywhere in time and space.
That's interesting to... You're talking about
So it's through its lack of vegetation that it does not appear.
Like a pantheon, or if you will, of archetypes waiting in the wings of agitation to come up to exist. I was going to say before it, I thought it was interesting. Did you know that when a plane is creating lift on the back, on the end of its wing, there's like a barrel of wind coming off the back. They call it wake turbulence. And it sustains as like a mini tornado just sitting in space, like floating around.
Hence, you always have two offshoots of steam, so to speak, off of wings.
Yeah, to watch out for. If you're a pilot, for example, landing in the wake of another plane, that can just send you right into the ground.
Aren't those chemtrails?
No. No, we're just talking about air moving.
You must be part of the conspiracy.
I deny. I deny that those exist.
Can you imagine, like, fucking fertilizing the entire sky with a chemical and then thinking to yourself, hey, wait a minute, I'm not never gonna breathe that in?
Well, it's been done lots of times. Those are like rain programs and stuff.
Yeah, they have very significant lack of support ongoingly. I mean, some
like,
people. No,
as
some
a government, you can just say, okay, it's been a.
They've taken a few shots at this and that and created it, and then they were like,
a
okay,
drought.
cool.
It's been a drought. Okay, well, I'll just fix the clouds up here. Literally, you dump some shit up, and then you get rain.
Except it's acid.
Whatever.
See what I'm going with this?
That's why you add some base chemicals.
And then you have another nation going, fuck off, you just took away our rain. You want to fight?
Just dropped it right there instead of later. People downwind getting dried up.
Shafted, yeah.
Yeah, that's like long rivers.
Alright, one last smoke.
Anyways, yeah, let's call it at that. I think it's been a pretty chill, good meets. Lots of success. And we'll pick it up in a couple weeks, I'm sure. Though I'm going to be on vacation, so maybe not too soon, but...
I promise to piss on all your plants.
Right, you did. And I'm holding you to that. And with that, peoples...